Hello everyone and welcome back. We got our live stream video going here today. We got a live stream video. We talked about this over the past week, 2 weeks. We're doing an end-to-end live hockey, an end-to-end hockey live stream video. We're going to be discussing all the moves that go down here today, and we're going to be discussing all the moves that happen right before the trade deadline. I'll be with you guys here until around 12:31ish. That's probably when the time I'll probably stop doing my live stream video, depending on how many trades trickle through. I may do a video later today discussing the trades that we never got around to, but for the time being, welcome to all of those who are watching. I thank you for all your support, and all of you guys I would never be able to with all of you guys, so thanks for all your support. Just a few quick things here before I discuss all of this. As you can see here in the four corners, there's a couple of boxes. These are the top 20 on my trade bait list. I put out a trade bait list, I think it was Tuesday night, might have been Wednesday morning. I put out a trade bait list discussing my top 50 trade bait players. So these are the top 20 I had. As you can see, some of these guys have already gone. Over here in the top corner, 2 through 4 have already gone. 2 who was Hannafin, 3 who was Gensel, 4 who was Henrique have all moved on. Also number 8 who was number 8, who was Sean Walker's gone. Number 10, who was Anthony Duclair's gone. On top of that, Tarasenko up here at number 15 is gone. And then Wennberg at 18 and Mantha at 20 were gone. Those were all prior to today. I did not get a chance to update them before today. And afterwards, I did not get a chance to update them after today. And on top of that, I did not get a chance to update them after today, and so far we've had 2 moves. We'll get to all those moves coming up in a second, but to start off here today, I just also wanted to touch on something else. My Wi-Fi that I have in the house here is not the best of Wi-Fi, so the screen might lag a little bit, so just keep that in mind. It's not anything to do with me, it's just the Wi-Fi that I have here, so don't hold that against me. But without further ado, we'll get kicked off today by discussing the things that have happened over the past little while. So we're going to start off here by discussing all the moves that have happened earlier today. I'll get to the ones I forgot to mention about yesterday in a little bit, but for the time being, we're going to do the ones that were mentioned today. So there's actually been quite a decent amount of trades so far at this point in time. We're about 2.5 hours just past. 2.5 hours left until the trade deadline, so we do have a couple of decent trades to talk about here today. We do have a couple that have already been moved. We'll start with a small deal that really doesn't have a huge impact on anything, but the St. Louis Blues have moved Malcolm Subban, who's basically a team 3rd or 4th string goaltender, to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So we know the Jackets don't have really good goaltending right now. Jet Greaves in the AHL has been fantastic. Tarasov's been so-and-so this year. He looks good. He could eventually be a solid starter for the Columbus Blue Jackets, but Merzlikins hasn't had the best of years, so they get some more goalie depth by adding Malcolm Subban. For the Jackets, this is a decent trade for them. Subban, he's not the greatest of goaltenders. At one point, he was a really good backup for the Vegas Golden Knights, but since then, he really hasn't been a huge contributor. I mean, he's gone to 31 games with Springfield in the AHL for the Blues this year, put up a .907 save percentage, a 2.94 goals against average. He's not doing overly bad, but I wouldn't expect him to get very many NHL starts. So for the most part, I think Subban will probably be like a 3rd or 4th string goaltender if they get into injuries. Then I think there's a very likely possibility he comes up, but that's a small trade that started us off today. It was a Subban to Columbus for future consideration, so not a huge deal there. Then we also saw a couple more interesting pieces of trades. First, it was Evgeny Kuznetsov with the Carolina Hurricanes. That was a really good move there by the... First, it was Evgeny Kuznetsov. Now, Kuznetsov, we know that he just went on waivers. There was a lot of speculation, especially by Elliot Friedman, that they were not going to be able to trade him. There was most likely going to be a buyout in the offseason, but the Capitals have moved him. It was an interesting trade, and the trade is as follows. The Capitals acquired a 2025 third-round pick from Carolina. It is the Hurricanes' 2025 third-round pick in exchange for Evgeny Kuznetsov with $3.9 million of his cap hit retained. So it's a very fantastic deal, in my opinion. Kuznetsov, he's not had the greatest of seasons over the past couple of years, but if he can regain his form from like 2-3 years ago, this could be a very fantastic pickup there for the Carolina Hurricanes. You know, they acquired Gensley this year. We'll talk about that in a little bit when I discuss all the moves that happened yesterday and never got around to, but I mean, Kuznetsov is only 2 years removed from nearly being a point per game, having 78 points in 79 games 2 years ago. Last year did not have an overly good season, had 55 points. That's in 81 games. So he's had a decent struggle last year. This year he's had even a bigger struggle. He went into the player assistant program. He's only put up 17 points in 43 games, so he's not had the greatest of seasons this year, but this is definitely a very fantastic ad for the Hurricanes. They know that they had a little bit of a weaker center group. I know they have Aho, but there's always been some talk with them upgrading their center group, and they're able to do it with the addition of Kuznetsov. So very fantastic stuff there for the Capitals to add Kuznetsov, who's going to be a fantastic addition there to the there's going to be a fantastic addition there for the Carolina Hurricanes. So a very good addition there for the Hurricanes. That he'll definitely be able to slot in right like the second line center, right behind Aho, and I think he should be able to fit in really well with wingers like Teravainen, Gensel, Jarvis, Nashis. I think he should be able to be a fantastic fit there for the Carolina Hurricanes. So just to recap here, the first two trades of the day was Kuznetsov going to the Carolina Hurricanes with 50% of his contract retained, so a $3.9 million cap hit going to Carolina. In exchange, the Capitals get a 2025 third-round pick. It is the Carolina Hurricanes pick, and then Malcolm Subban, who's a depth goaltender in the St. Louis Blues organization, has moved to Columbus, and he's now going to be part of the Columbus Blue Jackets organization in exchange for future consideration. So it's a pretty good deal there for both sides. I think this is a really good deal. Kuznetsov also on his deal has this year plus next year, so it's not just a deadline pending UFA rental move for the Carolina Hurricanes. It's actually a decent trade that can help them for the future too. So like I said, as long as Kuznetsov is able to find his form from a couple of years ago, which I think is possible in Carolina, I think he could be a very fantastic fit there for the Carolina Hurricanes. That's another really good trade we had. Then we had a couple more depth moves over the past little while. I'll get to the big one that happened in a couple of minutes, but first it was the Florida Panthers acquired Kyle Okposo, the Buffalo Sabres captain, who's a decent, really good bottom 6-4 at this point in time. He's not a really good top 9 player like he has been utilized in Buffalo over the past couple of years, but he's a really good bottom 6 forward on a stacked team like Buffalo. Like Florida, I mean. So he's going to Florida. His full cap, there's no money retention to that trade. In exchange, the Buffalo Sabres are getting conditional 2024 7th round pick. That is Florida's. That will upgrade to a 2024 5th round pick if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup. So if the Panthers go all the way again, and this time win the Stanley Cup instead of losing it, the Sabres will get a 5th round pick instead of a 7th round pick. So that's a pretty good deal in my opinion. And they also get prospect defender Callie Sialin. I'm hoping I pronounced that name correctly. But if you look at Okposo, this is going to be a fantastic addition for the Florida Panthers. The Sabres really want to do right by him. He's a really good veteran leader on that Sabres team. He was a really good bottom 6 forward. He really did help that team a lot. So I think they just wanted to get him into a place where he could go and win a Stanley Cup. And I think this is going to be a fantastic potentiality here in Florida. I mean, like I said, he's a pending UFA, so it's not a long-term commitment there for the Florida Panthers. He so far has 12 goals and 22 points in 61 games this year. Really hasn't been a huge point contributor since about 2 years ago. I mean, he had a 45-point season 2 years ago, his highest point total since the 16-17 season. So I mean, he's 2 years removed from that, but he's put up a decent amount of points as a bottom 6 forward, putting up 22 points this year, 28 points a couple of years ago, 28 points last year, I mean. So those are some pretty decent moves there for the Buffalo Sabres to move Okposo, and I think he should be able to fit in really well. I mean, they have a bottom 6 that consists of guys like Buchnevich, Lomberg. They also have guys like Sam Bennett, Anton Lundell, who can play on the third line. I do wonder if he could even get third line minutes in Florida. So it's a pretty good deal in my opinion for the Panthers. And after acquiring Tarasenko, adding Okposo too, that's a really good moves there for the Florida Panthers. Even though I don't have too many assets, they're able to improve that forward depth, which is really good for a team who really wants to go over to make the Stanley Cup final. So, for the Sabres, a draft pick, it's really good. It could be a 5th round pick, but most likely, unless the Panthers do win the Cup, it will be a 7th round pick. So it's a pretty good move there for the Sabres. As for the prospect they got, that's Callie Sialin. I really do hope I'm pronouncing that name right. He's a left shot defenseman. He was let me just check here. 5th round pick in the 2017 draft by the Rangers. He never signed with the Rangers. He's signed with the Florida Panthers a couple of years ago. He's actually done really well in the AHL, putting up 8 points in 39 games last year. So far this year, 3 assists in 22 games this year. So he's not a really good overly offensive defenseman. And he's another left shot defenseman, which is something that the Sabres have an abundance of. But I think he could eventually, if he can continue to grow in the AHL, maybe be like a solid, something like a third pair defenseman eventually for the Buffalo Buffalo Sabres. So this is a pretty good deal, in my opinion, for the Buffalo Sabres, and I think this is going to be a fantastic ad for the Sabres. So just to recap this trade, Cal Poso is going to the Florida Panthers from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for prospect Kalle Sijalin and a 2024 7th round pick that could turn into a 2024 5th round pick if the Sabres do wind up if the Panthers do wind up making the playoffs. So if the Panthers do end up winning the Stanley Cup. So a very good move there for the Panthers and the Sabres. Really good to contribute on that deal. So we got a couple of other moves to talk about here also over the past little while. So we got a couple of other moves to talk about. So some interesting stuff there. So we've got a couple of other moves to talk about. Sorry for the pause there, but we got a couple other moves to talk about. The Anaheim Ducks and the Colorado Avalanche have made a move. The Colorado Avalanche acquired a 2024 5th round pick from the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for young forward Ben Meyers. Now, Meyers is a decent player. He was signed by the Colorado Avalanche. He was one of those college free agents who a lot of people were sought after. The Avalanche acquired him a couple of years ago, wound up signing him to a new deal. Like I say, he's an undrafted player. He can play left wing. He can play center. He's in the final year of his deal. He's going to be an RFA at the end of this season, so that's a pretty good move there for the Anaheim Ducks to acquire him. So far, Meyers in 53 NHL games over the past 3 years has 6 goals and is a -10, so he's not done overly good at the NHL level, but he's put up 25 points this year in 32 AHL games, had 24 points in 30 AHL games last year, so he's a really, really good forward there for the Avalanche, at least at the AHL level, and he's been able to get some call-ups at the NHL level too, so that's a pretty good move there for the Colorado Avalanche to move a guy who's a depth player to a team where he might be able to get a little bit more opportunity. So it's a very good pickup there for the Ducks to get a solid bomb 6 forward in Ben Meyers, and I think it's possible that eventually he should be able to be a solid maybe eventually a third line forward. I think that's probably his ceiling, but for the time being he'll probably stay the AHL. I could definitely see him be like a solid third or fourth line forward next year, so a very good pickup there for the Ducks. In exchange, the Avalanche get a little more draft capital, picking up the Ducks 2024 5th round pick, so it's going to be probably a higher level pick in the 5th round, but it's a nice decent trade for the Avalanche to get a pick for someone who they never even had to draft or anything. They just signed him off of waivers, signed him in as a free agent, and he winds up going to Anaheim. So that's a pretty good deal. Just a quick recap. Anaheim gets a 2024 5th round pick in exchange for Ben Meyers. So it's a very good pick there. We also saw another depth deal between the New York Rangers and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Penguins starting off their sell mode. They moved Chad Ruhwedel to the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2027 4th round pick. So it's a really good move there for both those teams. I think Ruhwedel's a pending UFA, so the Penguins will not bring him back, so getting a 4th round pick, even though it's a ways down the line in 2027, is a pretty good move there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. For the New York Rangers, this is a pretty good move in my opinion. Ruhwedel's a red shot defenseman. We know that we've been talking about them potentially adding some more depth on their D. This is a pretty good move for them. Ruhwedel doesn't usually get into an overabundance of games, but he is a decent point contributor. The last 2 years he's gone to only 94 games. He's put up a combined 9 points, has 4 points in 47 games this year, so he's not doing overly bad, but he's more of a 6th, 7th D, especially a 7th D on a team that has a stacked blue line, so I'll probably think he's more of a depth defenseman, like a 7th D on the New York Rangers. He'll probably battle with like a guy like Erik Gustafsson for playing time in the playoffs, so it's definitely going to be an interesting situation to find out there, but like I said, it's a decent depth addition. He's a pending UFA, so it's not going to cost the Rangers overly much, and I think this is going to be a really good move there for the New York Rangers. So just to recap, Rangers get Chad Ruhwedel from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 2027 4th round pick, so it's a decent move. Penguins move a UFA who they weren't bringing back for a 4th round pick. I know it's a ways down the line, but still it's a draft pick. The Rangers, meanwhile, are able to get a solid depth defenseman for not too much of an asking price. That's a pretty good move there for the New York Rangers. Now those are all the trades we do have official details on, so we'll get to a couple of these other moves as well. We got to a couple of these other streams. We got to a couple of these other moves as well that have happened. We don't have the official announcements yet on them. I think they will be coming soon, but we do have a couple of other trades. One was Pat Maroon with the Minnesota Wild. We know that One was Pat Maroon with the Minnesota Wild. We know that there's a very likely chance Maroon was going to be dealt. He's from the Minnesota Wild. And he does wind up getting dealt. I mean, he was going to get moved to the Boston Bruins. It sounds like there'll be probably a depth round draft pick involved, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens with Maroon and exactly what the return is for him, but it does sound like he will be going to Boston. And it does sound like Tyler Toffoli is heading to the Winnipeg Jets. I'm not exactly sure the confirmation on the picks that are going back, but I think it sounded like it was a 2024, 2025 second round pick and a 2024 third round pick, if I'm correct. So I'll have to double check on that, but it does sound like Tyler Toffoli is going to the Winnipeg Jets. So I'll have to wait and see on that. Just give me a second here. I'm just going to check some things. Definitely some more interesting things on top of that. So like we said, Toffoli, it sounds like he's been dealt. It sounds like Toffoli's been dealt to the Winnipeg Jets. That could be a really great fit for the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, Toffoli is a decent middle 6'4". He's in the final year of his deal. He was number 7 on my trade bait list, so he's now gone. So that's an interesting move there for the Winnipeg Jets. That's a pretty decent deal in my opinion. I think this is a pretty decent move there for Winnipeg, and I think this is going to be a really good ad for them. I mean, they've already added Sean Monahan. They now add Tyler Toffoli. I mean, that top 9 looks scary. You got Toffoli, you got Monahan, you add that to Ehlers, Connor, Scheifele, Velarde when he gets back, Perfetti, I mean, Niederreiter, Appleton, Lowry, Iafallo. I mean, that forward group is stacked. It probably is one of the better forward groups in the West and probably even in the Central. I mean, I know the Avalanche have more firepower with McKinnon and stuff like that, and the Stars have a really well sought out forward depth as well, but I think this is a pretty good move there for the Jets, and I think it makes their forward groups one of the best. And even though they are built on defending and having Hellebuyck save them at some points, this team is going to be able to score in the playoffs. So this is a fantastic addition there for the Jets. I thought the asking price would have been a little bit higher for the Devils. I thought they would have been able to get a couple of picks in exchange for him, and they do get a couple of picks, but it's not as high as I thought. I thought it would have been like a first round pick and maybe a third round pick or another prospect, and instead it's the third and a second. So it's definitely a underwhelming return a little bit for the Devils, but there's a very lucky chance that the Devils don't make the playoffs. Toffoli was asking for an extremely long period of time for a long-term deal, and he was also asking for probably, my guess would be north of $7 to $8 million a year. So given that fact, it's probably best that the Winnipeg Jets wound up moving on from him, and it's definitely an interesting move. So definitely a really good move in my opinion for the Jets to acquire Tyler Toffoli. On top of that, they get, like we said, the Devils get 2 draft picks, which isn't overly bad, especially given the fact they give up Chirinkovich in a third for getting him in the offseason. So not a bad return there for the Devils, but definitely an underwhelming one. So that should be a trade that should be announced officially in the not too distant future. On top of that, like we said, Patrick Maroon, he's going to the Boston Bruins. Probably going to be like a 6th or 7th round pick, maybe with some conditions going back to Minnesota. But we saw Duhaime be traded yesterday. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes by the Minnesota Wild, so we know they're going to sell off at least a couple of pieces. They don't have too many pending UFAs. We've talked about this for quite some time now. They had a lot of pending UFAs until they signed Hartman, until they signed Zuccarello, until they signed Foligno right before the trade deadline, right before the season started. So given that fact, they didn't really have a huge amount of pending UFAs, and their one big one was Marc-Andre Fleury, but he doesn't want to leave Minnesota right now. So adding a couple of moving a couple of depth pieces who are on pending UFA deals is a pretty good move in my opinion for the Minnesota Wild. So definitely interesting stuff there, but a really good move there for the Minnesota Wild to definitely be able to add a piece like a Patrick Maroon on that team. So to move a piece like a Patrick Maroon to the Boston Bruins. And for Boston, definitely a really good addition there for Boston. On top of adding like on top of trying to add a couple of centers, they could definitely use some more physicality in the bottom 6. They brought in Milan Lucic in the offseason to be that sort of physicality they need in the playoffs, but he's on indefinite leave of absence. Definitely, it sounds like he probably won't come back this year. So given that fact, they needed some more toughness. Getting Maroon, I think, is a fantastic move there by Boston Bruins. And given the fact there's a very likely chance that they either have Toronto in the first round or Toronto or Florida in the second round, there's a very likely chance that they needed some more toughness to try if they wanted to try and go deep in this year's playoff run. So it sounds like Boston's about to get Patrick Maroon. It sounds like Toffoli's going to Winnipeg. And an interesting one we just found out here is that Nashville sounds like they're going to be acquiring Jason Zucker. So we'll get to more of that in a little bit once we have more details on that trade, but it does sound like Jason Zucker will be heading to Nashville Predators. So there are some of the moves that we've seen earlier today. So we do have a couple of other interesting things to look out for. On top of that, So I do expect some things to happen. I mean, I do think there's still some teams who are going to be adding. I know a lot of the pieces off of my trade deadline board are really going to, quite frankly, definitely be a very likely chance to be moved. I mean, there's already been a handful of guys off my board. Like we said, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, include Toffoli. I think we're almost at half of the trade board, the top 20 already gone. So just given that fact, I mean, it's quite surprising that we've had so many moves. I mean, it's not overly surprising. It's a little bit surprising that we've actually had not too many moves. I mean, last year, there was only 19 trades on deadline day, and there was a ton of it going... and there was a ton of it going right into the... deadline. I mean, we were calling it deadline week last year, not deadline day. So, I mean, it's a little bit surprising that we've had so little amount of trades, so much amount of trades, but given the fact of last year, I'm not overly surprised by that. So, interesting stuff there, but I do expect some more guys to be moved. Like I said, I have Buchnevich number 1 on my trade bait list. I expect him to potentially be moved. I think it's a possibility. We know the Canadians have been looking to move Jake Allen, so I do wonder if that's a possibility for the Canadians. On top of that, there are a couple other guys on this trade bait list, and if you want to go and check out my entire trade bait list, all 50 players, you can go to the End-to-End Hockey blog after the video. I'll link it down in the YouTube cards, in the YouTube description, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. You can check out my top 50 trade bait list, so definitely, if you want to go check it out and see all the 50 players, you can go check it out, but those are my top 20 that I have over here, so that's sort of the way we are right now as of this trade deadline stream. So at this point in time, it sounds like Chychrun's going to Nashville, Toffoli's gone to Winnipeg, and Maroon's going to Boston. And trades we do have confirmed. Just a quick second here. So trades we do have confirmed: Chad Ruhwedel's going to New York for a 2027 4th round pick, heading to Pittsburgh. Ben Mayers is going to Anaheim in exchange for a 2024 5th round pick, going to the Colorado Avalanche. Kalle Stajalin, once again, I'm hoping I'm saying that name right, and a 2024 7th round pick that's conditional, could turn to a 2024 5th rounder, is going to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Kyle Okposo. And the Carolina Hurricanes are acquiring Evgeny Kuznetsov, who has this year plus next year left on his contract, at 50% of his contract retained, so a $3.9 million cap hit in exchange for a 2025 3rd round pick, and Malcolm Subban's been dealt to the Columbus Blue Jackets for future consideration. So far, not too many moves so far this year. I mean, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you include, about 8 deals if you include Zucker, Toffoli, and Maroon. I think we had 19 last year at the trade deadline, and there's definitely going to be a lot of moves happening right at 12 o'clock. That's what we saw last year. It's what we usually see on trade deadline days. So we're still about 2 hours away from the actual trade deadline, so I expect things to pick up over the next little while, and there's still a couple of pieces who I do think could wind up being moved. I mean, we do also see a couple of signings today. I mean, there are a couple of decent ones too. I mean, we'll get to the signings that we never got around to over the past little while in a second, but we saw 2 signings today that happened earlier. Parker Witherspoon, who's a depth defenseman with Boston, has actually been really good since his call-up. Today, this year, has signed a 1-year contract extension with the Boston Bruins with the AAV of $800,000. It's a really good deal there for the Boston Bruins. I mean, Witherspoon got into a little bit of games last year at the NHL level. His first few games at the NHL level with the Islanders, put up an assist in 12 games. So far this year has gone to 6 games at the NHL level. I mean, 32 games at the NHL level with the Boston Bruins, putting up 6 points. So he's actually done quite well this year for the Boston Bruins. He's definitely worked out as like a solid 6th, 7th D. So that getting him signed, I think, does make a guy like Matt Grzelcyk probably not going to be back anymore. So with Boston not having made too many moves and not having too much cap space, I do wonder if signing Witherspoon leads to a Matt Grzelcyk trade. I think it's quite a likely possibility. So we're going to have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But it does sound like Boston likes Witherspoon, and they're able to sign him to a 1-year extension. So that's a pretty good deal for the Boston Bruins. Like I said, Witherspoon's been mostly an AHL player throughout his entire career, but I think he could work out really well as like a 3rd pair defenseman. And then we also saw another one, which is actually one of these top 20 players. One of these guys are not going to be moved after signing a new extension, and that is original expansion draft pick of the Seattle Kraken, Jordan Eberle. Now, Eberle's worked out quite well with the Kraken ever since joining them from the expansion draft. I mean, he was the pick from the New York Islanders. He's worked out extremely well, been a really good veteran leader on that team. The Kraken, while they are on the outside looking in and did move Wennberg, are not completely ruled out for making the playoffs right now, so they wind up adding Jordan Eberle and keeping him. They signed him to a $4.75 million AAV deal for this year plus next year too. So it's a really good deal for the Kraken, 2-year deal with an AAV of $4.75 million. For what Eberle brings, I'm pretty sure that's a really good deal deal for them. I mean, he's got 14 goals and 23 assists and 37 points this year. I mean, it's not anywhere close to where he had last year with 63 points, or even the year prior where he had 44, but still, he's only played 58 games. He's been injured a couple of times this year. I think he could be a really good fit for the Seattle Kraken long term. So they're going to sign for a 2-year deal. They're not going to move him anymore, so number 6 on our trade bait list is gone. It was Eberle resigning with the Seattle Kraken, and he's now not going to get moved either. So this is a really good move there, though, by the Seattle Kraken. I think adding Eberle to the Kraken is a very, very good addition there for the Kraken. So as much as there has been some talk about him being moved, and even if there was no extension, maybe he was going to stay, maybe he was going to get moved, he does want to end up staying. So it's a really good pickup there for the Kraken to keep Eberle, and one of their original draft picks is staying for the next 2 seasons. So it's a very good pickup there for Seattle, and hopefully that move will help them potentially even make it back into the playoffs this year. But those are the only 2 signings we've had over the past little while. I mean, we did not mention a couple of signings that happened We did not mention a couple of the signings over the last couple of days, so I'll touch on these ones just a little bit here too. First, Connor Punnett signed a 3-year ELC with the Dallas Stars yesterday. He's a left shot defenseman, undrafted, signed a 3-year ELC with the AAV of $870,000. Now, Punnett has not had the best of seasons. He's actually done pretty well. I mean, last year he put up 66 points in 48 games over in the OHL. This year's put up 9 goals and 50 points in 59 OHL games, so he's got more points in less games. So it's a pretty good pickup there for the Stars. I mean, they already have a really deep blue line, some really good blue line prospects and guys like Chychrun and Bichelle, but they do add to that with Punnett. Maybe he never becomes an NHL defenseman. Maybe he's more of an AHL defenseman. Maybe he could eventually be like a solid 6th, 7th D on the Stars blue line. So that was a decent signing there for the Stars yesterday, but it's not an overly huge one. We also saw Evan Cormier sign a deal with the Florida Panthers. He's a goaltender. He was a 2018 4th-round pick of the Detroit Red Wings. He signs a 1-year deal with the Florida Panthers to finish out the season. He's basically been an AHL, ECHL goaltender over the past while. This year, a split time with the Charlotte Checkers and the Florida Everblades in the ECHL. I mean, he has a 9/10 save percentage in the ECHL in 18 games, an 868 save percentage in 5 AHL games. So he still looks more like an ECHL goaltender. It's just a little bit more add depth for Florida Panthers, and he was placed on waivers yesterday, so I don't think they view him as like a really solid NHL goaltender. And they still have Spencer Knight in the AHL too, so I mean, if they were to run into injuries, Knight would be called up. So I definitely don't think Cormier is going to get any NHL action, but he could be a decent AHL goaltender and a little bit more depth to that position. So that's a really good move there for the Florida Panthers yesterday. We definitely do also have a couple of other things. On top of that, I mean, you also got Gustav Forsling, who signed yesterday, and Jonah Gadjevich with the Florida Panthers. Those are some 2 really big extensions. I mean, Gadjevich signed a deal right before the start of the season this year. I mean, he was a depth add for the Florida Panthers, but it's actually worked out really well. Just let me check this out here. Yeah, he's put up 4 points in 33 NHL games this year. Went on a conditioning stint a little while ago. Put up 1 goal in 3 AHL games. So he looks like a decent player. He's not going to put you up a whole bunch of points, but he's a really good bottom 6 contributor. He's worked out really well. He signed a 2-year extension with the AV of league minimum $775. So that's not overly surprising in my opinion for the Florida Panthers. I mean, he's a really, really good bottom 6 forward. That's mostly what he is. He's a little bit of an aggressor. He can be a solid physical body on that forward group, and I think he can be a really good add there for the Florida Panthers. So adding Gadjevich in the bottom 6 is a pretty good move there for Florida, and I think he should be able to be a solid add there for the Panthers for the next couple of years. So it's another decent bottom 6 add for the Panthers. And then we also saw the big extension yesterday, which was Gustav Forsling. We know that the Panthers have been wanting to sign Sam Reinhart, Brandon Montour, and Gustav Forsling before free agency next year. They wanted to try and get all these guys extended, and they have. For one of them at least. I mean, Bennett, Reinhart, and Montour are still pending UFAs as of right now. I do wonder if those guys get done in the not too distant future. I mean, Reinhart sounded like he was probably going to stay there. I'm not sure about Montour. He's a really good piece of that team. He's a top pair defenseman. He should try and remain with that team. I mean, he's worked out extremely well in Florida. But I do wonder if with the Panthers potentially making some other moves, maybe they don't bring back Montour. I'm not sure about that. But they are able to get at least Forsling done. I mean, Forsling signs an 8-year contract extension with an AV of $5.75 million. It's a pretty good deal, in my opinion, for Forsling. I mean, he's got he was a waiver claim by Florida Panthers a couple of years ago. I mean, it's probably one of the best waiver claims ever. I mean, in Florida, he's actually found himself a home in a top 4 role. I mean, Chicago had him as an NHLer for a little while, and he never worked out really well. But the last 3 years for Forsling, I mean, he's been fantastic. 2 years ago, had 10 goals and 37 points in 71 games. Last year, played a full 82-game season, putting up 13 goals and 41 points. And this year, in 63 games, he's already at 32 points. So he's only 9 back of his career high from last year, and he's still got 19 games to go. So I think it's quite possible he could hit a new career high of over half a point per game. So it's quite possible that Florida does do really good here. Now, it's an 8-year contract extension. Forsling is 27 years old, so I'll take him until he's around 35. So some people may argue it's a little bit too long for him. Maybe he should have signed like a 6 or 7 year deal. Yeah, but it does keep the AAV down. And I think at $5.75 million, that's a really good deal for Forsling. I think he's on a... Right now, he's on a $2.6 million deal, so he gets a pay bump of just over $3 million, so it's a decent extension in my opinion. It may have been a little bit too long term, but to keep Forsling in the fold is a very good piece of work there for Florida, so that's another piece of work that was signed yesterday. We also saw Oscar Sundqvist in St. Louis sign a new contract extension yesterday. It was a pretty good deal too. He went back to St. Louis after a year in Detroit, after being dealt at the deadline. He's a right wing / center. He can play fourth line minutes. He's a really good fourth liner. He signed a 2-year extension with the AAV of $1.5 million, so it's a decent deal for a bottom 6 forward. But Sundqvist has actually had a pretty good season this year. If you look at his point totals, his career high is 31 points. He's already only 10 points back of that with 21 points. He probably won't hit his career high, but his second best point total in his career was 23 a couple of years ago. I think that was the year when the St. Louis Blues, the year after they won the Cup. So that was a pretty decent deal there for the Sundqvist when he had 23 points. Those were 2 of his best years, back-to-back seasons. The year they won the Cup, the year after they won the Cup. After that, he's really sort of fallen off a little bit. But now Sundqvist, who's back in St. Louis, has 21 points, his highest point total since that 23-point season. And he's worked out really well with St. Louis. He's been extraordinarily well while he's in St. Louis. I mean, in Detroit and Minnesota last year, he didn't really work out overly well, but he's worked out extraordinarily well. So I think this is a really good move there for the St. Louis Blues, and I think he can work out really well as like a solid bottom 6 forward long term. Is $1.5 million a little bit too expensive for like a solid bottom 6 forward? Maybe, it's possible, but with the Blues needing some more consistency from their bottom 6, I think signing Sundqvist to this sort of a deal is a pretty good move there for the Blues. So some pretty good signings there from the last couple of days. We also did see a couple of other signings from the past few days they never got around to mentioning. First, Max Comtois, who's a former Anaheim Duck, never got around to getting an NHL contract this year. He couldn't find NHL work anywhere, so he winds up signing a 1-year deal with the Carolina Hurricanes, league minimum, to finish out his contract. So it's to finish out the season, so that's a pretty good move there for the Carolina Hurricanes to add some more depth to their forward group. He promptly was placed on waivers and cleared, so not too surprising there. We talked about Sandin and Bogosian on previous videos. If you want to go check them out, you can. We also didn't talk about prospect Ivan, who's an undrafted player who was playing in the AHL for the Colorado Avalanche. He signed a 2-year ELC with the Colorado Avalanche with an AAV of $845,000. It's a pretty good deal for him. Last year, he put up 90 points in 64 QMJHL games. He went into the AHL this year. So far, it's 27 points in 51 AHL games. It's not a bad point total there by any means for the Colorado Avalanche. So I definitely do like this sort of move by the Avalanche to sign a young prospect who's a center to an ELC, and I think eventually there's a very likely chance that Ivan could wind up being a solid bottom 6 forward there for the Colorado Avalanche, maybe even like a third-line center. So it's a pretty good deal there for the Avalanche. We also saw a couple of other guys, and we talked about Miromanov signing in Calgary. That was a pretty good deal. And we also saw LA sign 2 players, including Jacob Ingham, who's a goaltender. He was drafted by the Kings. I'm not sure if he was signed this year. Yeah, he wasn't signed right now. He did sign a 1-year, 2-way deal with AV of $165,000 to sort of finish out the season in LA. We saw him recently sign Aaron Dell. They don't have goalie depth at this point in time. The only guy besides Riddick and Talbot who was on the roster signed was Eric Portillo, and I think they want to keep him in the minors. So they signed Dell and Ingham to sort of be their at this point in time to sort of be their insurance markers in net in case those other two guys go down with injuries. I mean, he's got a 917 save percentage in 6 AHL games and 918 save percentage in 25 ECHL games. So he's actually done quite well at both the ECHL and the AHL levels. I do think if there were to be some injuries to both Talbot and Riddick, he could be called up. But unless that happens, I don't think he'll get called up. So he'll probably be an AHL player. We also saw Jacob Mover right after being placed on waivers sign a 2-year contract extension with the LA Kings. He signs a 2-year deal with the AAV of $775,000. He's actually been a decent prospect there for the LA Kings. He looks like he eventually could be a solid maybe 4th or 5th defenseman on the LA Kings team. So it does seem like that's a really good move there for the Kings. So far this year has a goal in 11 games. In his career, he's got 3 points in 32 NHL games. He has 18 points in 34 AHL games so far this year. So it was a really good move there. I think that sort of did deter a couple of teams from claiming him off of waivers. And he does sign a 2-year ELC with a 2-year extension with the AV of $775,000. So it's a pretty good deal for the Kings. But those are all the signings I never got around to discussing over the past couple of days. So just a quick recap here from all the signings over the past couple of days. Mover signs a 2-year extension with LA. Ingham signs a 1-year deal to finish out the season with LA. Comtois signs a 1-year deal to finish out the season with the Carolina Hurricanes. Ivan signs a 2-year ELC with the Colorado Avalanche. Sundqvist signs a 2-year extension with the St. Louis Blues. Gadjevich signs a 2-year extension with the Florida Panthers. Forsling signs an 8-year extension with the Florida Panthers. Evan Cormier signs a 1-year deal with the Florida Panthers to finish out the season. Connor Punnett signs an ELC with the Dallas Stars to become one of their new prospects. Parker Weatherspoon earlier today signs a 1-year extension with Boston. And Jordan Eberle earlier today, who was number 6 on our trade bait list, signs a 2-year extension with the Boston Bruins and with the Seattle Kraken to remain with the Seattle and not be traded at this point in time. So some interesting stuff there and a lot of interesting signings from over the past little while. So we do have some other interesting trades to look at here that could wind up being coming. Like we said, Zucker's been dealt. That's not... We do have another NHL trade to discuss that sounds like Klim Kostin has been traded. And yeah, he has been. Okay, so we got a couple of trades here. The official details for a Tyler Toffoli deal have occurred. So Tyler Toffoli, with half of his salary retained, so that's a $2.125 million cap hit going to Winnipeg, is going to Winnipeg. So Toffoli at $2.125 million goes to Winnipeg. In exchange, the New Jersey Devils get a 2024 third-round pick, which is the Jets, and a 2025 second-round pick, which is the Jets. So it's not a whole bunch of asking price. In my opinion, this is a steal of a deal for the Jets to get a top 6 goal scorer like Toffoli, who can fit into that top 6, can work out, gel well with the other guys in that top 6, Monahan, Scheifele, Ehlers, and not give up a first-round pick is surprising to me. I thought Toffoli was for sure going to go for a first-round pick, but he winds up going for a second and a third, which is a decent return for the Devils, but it's not the return they were definitely looking for. So in my opinion, the Jets, given the fact they were able to get the Devils to retain on this, and they did not have to give up a first-round pick, even without retention, I thought I was going to get a first-round pick. I think that's a pretty good deal in my opinion for the Jets. Then we also saw a new deal here that just happened. Klim Kostin, who's a bomb 6 forward, signed a 2-year deal, I think it was, in Detroit, has been dealt to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for the defenseman who's in the AHL right now, Radim Šimić, and a 2024 7th-round pick that is New Jersey. So this is a decent trade in my opinion for both these sides. For Kostin in San Jose, he's now going to be a decent bottom 6-4 for the Sharks. They've moved Duclair last night. We'll get to that move in a second. We also talked about them potentially moving Barabanov earlier today. So they needed some more depth pieces who can help in their bottom 6. Kostin's exactly that. He was a decent player who was a 30th overall pick, I think it was, back in the 2017 draft by the St. Louis Blues. He does have 1 more year left on his deal. There's no salary retention on that. So Kostin does go to San Jose for this year plus the rest of next year, so that's an interesting move. He hasn't been a consistent NHL forward at the Detroit Red Wings for the NHL level, put 4 points in 33 AHL games. Definitely looked like a decent player, but it's not been a consistent NHL forward. The Red Wings team does have a really deep forward group, so I can see why he's been healthy scratched a couple of times, but hopefully in San Jose he'll get more of a bigger opportunity and a little bit more of a bigger role to play in San Jose, and hopefully if the Sharks are slow sellers at next year's trade deadline, maybe they move him then, so that'll be an interesting move there for the Sharks. Meanwhile, Radim Šimić, the defenseman who is on a contract that has not aged well. He can play both sides of the defense. He's in the AHL right now. He's in the final year of a 4-year contract with the AV of $2.25 million, and he has not worked out overly well. I mean, he had a really good season a couple of years ago. Back in 18-19, 19-20, had 9 points. After that, he really fell off a cliff. I mean, he had 6 points in 40 games in 2021. He had 2 points last year in 36 NHL games, and this year's playing 44 NHL games, putting up 3 points, but also playing 40 AHL games, Last year he played in 44 NHL games, putting up a goal and 2 assists, 3 points. This year's only playing 40 AHL games, putting up 16 points, 4 goals. So he's been a really, really low-end player in the San Jose Sharks organization. He's been passed on the depth charts by multiple of their young players. So he's a depth defenseman. He probably won't get into very much action with the Detroit Red Wings unless they run into some injuries. But at least he's a good, solid guy who can be like an 8 or 9 in Detroit. And I think it could be a really good fit there for Detroit. So that's a really good pickup there for the Red Wings. And then they also got a 7th round pick. It's a 2024 7th round pick. It's the Devils. It probably won't amount to an overabundance of things, but it's a decent pickup there, no doubt, for the Detroit Red Wings. So just to recap, Toffoli has been dealt to the Winnipeg Jets. 50% of his contract has been retained. And in exchange, the Devils have gotten a 2025 second round pick and a 2024 third round pick, and then on another trade we saw Klim Kostin be dealt by the San Jose Sharks. Acquired by the San Jose Sharks, and they deal Ram Shimmick and a 2024 7th round pick, which is New Jersey's, to the Detroit Red Wings. So those are some pretty good deals there that have happened. We do have a couple of more trades that are going to be happening over the next little while. There has also been one more small trade. It's not a huge one, but depth forward Nick Baton has been dealt to the New York Rangers in exchange for depth. Let me just check here. Another depth forward in Turner Elson being dealt to Minnesota Wild. It's a depth move for both sides. I mean, Elson has been majority of his time in the AHL for his career. Yeah, he's only gone to 3 NHL games. This year's put 12 points in 38 games with the Hartford Wolfpack of the AHL, so not overly surprising there that he gets dealt as a depth player. Nick Baton was dealt by New York Rangers. Acquired by New York Rangers. He's been a really good bomb 6 forward there for the Wild, and when they've had some injuries earlier this year, he was called up. He got 2 assists in 6 NHL games, but has been lighting it up at the AHL level, putting up 40 points in 44 AHL games. So he's looked like a pretty good AHL player. He's not at this point in time an NHL player. He's probably going to be like a solid 14th, 15th forward on the New York Rangers depth chart, so he'll probably stay in the AHL. But if there weren't just some injuries, I could definitely see Baton be a solid call-up option there for the Rangers. So that's a pretty good move there for the Rangers. We do have a couple of other interesting things too. It does seem like we do have a couple of other trades that we'll be discussing in a couple of minutes. The Zucker and the Maroon details still haven't come through yet, so we'll wait on those 2 things. But we do have a couple of other trades I wanted to discuss that went down yesterday, never talked about. Now, if you want to check out some of my other videos that I did do, you can check them out on my YouTube channel. I did all the trades that happened over on Wednesday. I touched on all of those ones, plus the first 3 trades that happened yesterday. But we didn't get to any of the other trades that happened yesterday, so we'll get to all those ones right here. First, it was Minnesota moving Brandon Duhaime yesterday to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a 2026 third round pick. That's a decent move, in my opinion, for those two. For the Avalanche, getting Duhaime, it's a decent bottom 6 forward. He can play both wing positions. He's actually been a really good bottom 6 forward this year for the Minnesota Wild. I mean, he's got 8 points in 62 NHL games this year. He has 10 points last year. He had 17 points a couple of years ago. So definitely, he's been a really good, productive bottom 6 forward. He's not going to put up an overabundance of points, but he's definitely a rough and tumble forward. Can definitely give some sort of physical playoff style hockey to him. So that's a really good addition there for the Colorado Avalanche. After acquiring Walker and Milstad on Wednesday, they then add Duhaime, so that's a pretty good move there for the Avalanche. The Wild, we know that he wasn't coming back. Duhaime was probably the most likely trade chip for the Wild entering today. I'm pretty sure he was number 49 on my trade bait list. I would have to go back and check, but he was down there on my trade bait list too in the low 40s, so he was one of the guys who went off my trade bait list too, so interesting stuff there. But getting a 3rd round pick for him is pretty good for the Minnesota Wild. I know there have been some people who said that he could get a 2nd round pick, but he does go for a 3rd round pick. So that's a pretty good move, in my opinion, for the Wild to move Brandon Duhaime in exchange for a 3rd round pick. So that's a pretty good move. I'll probably say the Wild do win this deal, given the fact I think Duhaime is more of a 4th or 5th round pick type of player, not a 3rd round pick, but still, it's a pretty good move there for the Avalanche to add some more depth to their forward group. So just to recap, yesterday we saw Duhaime go to Colorado in exchange for a 2026 3rd round pick going to the Minnesota Wild. So that's a pretty good deal. Then we saw the Predators pull off a couple of deals. First, they acquired Anthony Beauvillier from the Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for a 2024 5th round pick. That was a pretty decent deal too. Beauvillier was moved to Chicago earlier in the season by Vancouver Canucks. Canucks needed room to acquire Nicky Isadora, so they moved him to Chicago for a 5th round pick, if I'm correct. and now he gets flipped by the Blackhawks to the Predators for a 5th-round pick. So that's not too surprising there. Bouvillier was one of the few players on the Blackhawks that probably could have been trade chipped there for the Hawks. I mean, he's probably going to fit in extremely well with the Predators on like their 3rd line probably. He's going to definitely give them some more depth, especially with the loss of Trennan. Duhaime, he can play both sides of the wing for the Predators. He hasn't had a really good season this year after putting up 40 points last year in 82 games with the Canucks and the Islanders. Which was probably actually, let me just check. Yeah, that was his best season on record. He's had probably one of his worst seasons on record this year, putting up only 4 goals and 14 points in 45 NHL games. I mean, he's played in only 40 games a couple of times over the past little while, but he's had a lot better seasons than this year. He's been dealt with injuries when he was in Chicago, and he hasn't worked out overly well. So I do wonder what his next contract's going to be worth. I think that $4 million is definitely an overpayment for Bouvillier. He's going to be a UFA at the end of this year, so I do wonder what his next contract looks like. My guess would be somewhere around $1.5–2 million. I do think that would be interesting in the offseason to sign Bouvillier, but he's definitely not the player that the Islanders once thought they had, so it's a decent pickup there for the Predators and should definitely help them with their playoff run, but it's not a huge addition. And the Blackhawks are able to recoup a 5th-round pick in order to move Bouvillier. So those are a couple of decent picks we saw yesterday, and we also saw another interesting deal that involved both the Avalanche and the Predators. The trade as follows. The Predators moved Yakov Trenin, like we said, to the Colorado Avalanche, as well as defensive prospect Graham Sward. And the Avalanche, in turn, moved Jeremy Hansel to the Nashville Predators and a 2025 3rd-round pick, which is the Colorado Avalanches. So this is a decent deal, in my opinion, for both sides. Sward is a decent defensive prospect, putting up some really good numbers in WHL. He's not potentially probably going to be a regular NHL defenseman, maybe. He could be a solid 3rd-pair defenseman, but there's no guarantee Sword ever becomes a solid NHL player, so that's an interesting move. But the key piece of the deal for the Avalanche here was Trennan. He's a really good bottom 6 forward, sort of like to a lesser extent, a guy like Tanner Jeannot. He's a left wing, he's a center, he can play a couple of decent positions. He had 24 points last year and the year prior. This year only has 14 points so far in 60 games. I mean, it's quite possible playing with some better players in Colorado. He could start to pick up his point pace, but for a time being, he is having a little bit of a down year. But he is having the best plus-minus of his career, putting up a +12 so far this year, so he looks like a pretty good player. I think he could be a really good addition there for the Colorado Avalanche. So they've added Duhaime and Trennan in their bottom 6, and they've also had Millsat as their second-line center and Walker as a solid top 4 defenseman. So the Avalanche are making some moves, and I think that does make them a lot better. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the chat or in the comments, whatever you want to do, on what you think the Avalanche have done, and does it really improve this team, adding guys like Millsat, like Trennan, like Duhaime, like Walker, who they also added, moving Johansson. Like, have they been good moves by Avalanche, or do you think they're probably not overly good moves for the Avalanche? Definitely, have to get your thoughts on that. But the package going back to Nashville is a pretty decent one. Jeremy Hansel, who signed a new ELC with the Avalanche just before the trade wound going down. He looks like a pretty good prospect. He's a 2023 6th-round pick. He signed a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $851,000. It's a decent contract, in my opinion, for a young player who hasn't any NHL experience. He's a WHL player, has 50 points in 58 games. He's not doing overly badly this year, and he looks like he could eventually be a solid 3rd-pair defenseman. So this is a pretty good move for the Predators to pick up a young defensive prospect like Tim. And I think given their weaker left side, I think they have a really strong right side on the defensive end right now, but given their weaker left side, I do think there's a very likely chance that this is a really good move there for the Nashville Predators to get a solid prospect in Hansel, who I think could eventually be a solid 3rd-pair defenseman in a couple of years' time. So that's a pretty good move there. They also got a 2025 3rd-round pick, so they are able to add a 3rd-round pick next year's draft, move a 5th-round pick for Bouvillier. So it's a pretty good move there for the Predators. They subtract off their forward group, and the forward group are able to get a 3rd-round pick in return too. So it's a pretty good move there for the Nashville Predators. But we do have a couple of other trades we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But definitely those are some interesting trades from the last little bit. So we do have a couple of other things we'll probably have to discuss. Let me go look and see if there's any other pieces of news right now. It does sound like there will be probably a lot more pieces of news heading into the thing. We're now only an hour and 40-ish minutes away from the trade deadline, so passing, so we're going to have to wait for a little bit. Not really much news here. Let's see if there's some other big pieces of news that are happening right now. Yeah, the Costin deal, the Toffoli deal. Yeah, it seems like mostly all of the deals are so far caught up right now. We'll probably have a couple more in the next little bit, but for the time being, it seems like we're all caught up on the deals that have happened today. So we'll probably go back over to see some of the more deals that happened yesterday. So definitely, it sounds like there will be a couple more deals that happen over the next little while. But going back to, going back to a couple of other deals that happened yesterday, we saw a couple of prospect swaps. We talked about Jacob Perreault being swapped for Jan Mysak in yesterday's video. That was a pretty decent prospect swap in my opinion. We also saw another young player swap as Matthias Emilio Peterson was dealt by the Calgary Flames to Dallas Stars in exchange for prospect Riley Damiani. I think that I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah. So for Emilio Peterson, he was a 2018 sixth-round pick of the Calgary Flames. He's a center. He's basically been playing in the AHL his entire career. Doesn't have an NHL game of action. He's put up 30 points in 54 AHL games this year after having 44 points in 61 AHL games last year. So he's had a really good stretch so far in the AHL. He looks like it could eventually be a solid fourth-line center. So that's a pretty good pickup there for Dallas Stars, and hopefully a change of scenery as well for Matthias Emilio Peterson. As for Damiani, he has more NHL experience than Peterson. He was a 2018 fifth-round pick. He's also a center. I think he's in the final year of his deal. He's going to be RFA at the end of the year. So that's a pretty good move there for the Flames. He played in 7 games 2 years ago at the NHL level, putting up 2 points. That was a pretty good move there for them. So getting him is a really good pickup there. He put up 36 points in 55 AHL games that year. He also had 31 points in 59 games last year at the AHL level, and this year has put up 23 points in 53 AHL games. So he's been a consistent AHL player. He's even gotten a couple of points at the NHL level. So I do think he could eventually get a couple of call-up options, especially with the Flames being a seller at this point in time. So that was a pretty good move there. Stars get Emilio Peterson from the Flames in exchange for Riley Damiani, so not too surprised there. Then the Carolina Hurricanes moved Cade Weber, who's a decent defenseman, unsigned player who does not even have an NHL contract, to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for a 2026 sixth-round pick. For Weber, he's a left-shot defenseman playing over in college right now. NCAA, put up 6 points in 31 NCAA games so far this year. Put up 6 points last year in 48 NCAA games. So definitely he's been a really good, consistent NCAA player there. He was a 2019 fifth-round draft pick. Leafs are able to get him. They'll probably have to try and sign him to a new contract, but this could be a really good pickup there. I think he could eventually be a solid third pair defenseman for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's a pretty good pickup there, even though it's not an overly flashy addition and it's not someone who's going to help this team right now for their cup run. It's a pretty good pickup there for the Toronto Maple Leafs, so that's a pretty good pickup there. And then we also saw 2 really interesting deals with players that were on my trade bait list late last night. First, we saw the San Jose Sharks move Anthony Duclair with his full $3 million salary and a 2025 7th-round pick to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Jack Thompson and a 2024 3rd-round pick. So this is a really good pickup there for the Bolts. We know they are really short on cap space, but more importantly, they're short on prospects and picks. They missed out on Noah Hannafin. They could not give up a first-round pick. There was a lot of talk that Hannafin wanted to go to Tampa, but he never really went there because they don't really have the assets to pull off the deal that Vegas did. So they don't have a lot of assets, but this is a deal that they could pull off. Duclair's a decent winger. He can be left wing. He can play right wing. I think Duclair was one of the guys in my top 20, if I'm correct. If not, he's just outside my top 20, so that's a pretty good pickup there for the Tampa Bay Lightning so far this year. Has 27 points in 56 games, not to the extent he had over the past couple of years. I mean, 2 years ago he had 58 points in Florida. The year prior he had 32 points in Florida, so definitely a little bit of a down year for Duclair at the NHL level, but he's had 16 goals, and he's actually done quite well in a really, really bad San Jose Sharks team. So in Tampa, I'd probably think he'll be a solid third line, maybe even second line winger. Could potentially play with guys like Cirelli, Stamkos, Paul. So that could be a really good fit there for the Bolts. He's a speedy winger. He can play penalty kill minutes. He's a very good, versatile player. He's playing on the other Florida team, and now he's going to the different Florida team. So it's a really good pickup there for the Tampa Bay Lightning yesterday. They also pick up a 2025 7th-round pick. It's a decent piece of draft capital, not a huge pick there, but it's a decent pick that will probably be most likely getting lower end of the draft next year. So that's a pretty good pickup there for the Lightning. As for the Sharks, they get a decent prospect defenseman, Jack Thompson. He's probably one of the better prospect defensemen that the Tampa Bay Lightning have. He's a right shot defenseman. He was a 2020 third-round pick of the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's got this year plus next year left on his ELC. He's looked pretty good at the AHL level. He got into his first game of NHL action earlier this year when the Bolts had some injuries on the blue line. He's had 32 points in 46 AHL games this year after having 23 and 71 last year. I mean, he's had a major step up in point production at the AHL level. I think eventually he could be a solid third pair defenseman, offensive defenseman for San Jose Sharks. And if they do move a couple more pieces off that blue line, it'll either improve his AHL role in the system, going from an AHL team that has a couple of blue liners to an AHL team that doesn't have an overabundance of blue liners in San Jose. So he could be getting either an increased role at the AHL level, or I could even see him get a couple of looks towards the end of the season at the NHL level. So those are some pretty good moves there for the San Jose Sharks to get Jack Thompson. And then they also get a 2024 third-round pick from the Tampa Bay Lightning. So it's probably going to be a lower-end draft pick. The Bolts look like they're headed to make the playoffs. There's no guarantee, though. The Islanders and the Devils and the Capitals are all not too far away from the Bolts and the Red Wings. So there's definitely no guarantee whatsoever that the Bolts make the playoffs. But if they do, that probably will be a lower-end draft pick. So that's a pretty good pick up there for San Jose. So just to recap, young D prospect Jack Thompson is probably one of the better D prospects in the Tampa organization. Gets moved to San Jose along with a 2025 third round pick, which was Tampa's. And in exchange, the Tampa Bay Lightning acquire Anthony Duclair, which is a $3 million cap hit, and 2025 seventh round pick. So that's a pretty good move there, in my opinion. The Sharks get a D prospect and a pick, and the Bolts are able to get a solid top six player who could hopefully help them continue to be a playoff team. So that's an interesting move there. We also have a couple of other interesting things to talk about. We also have a couple of other interesting things to talk about. We'll talk about the Gensel deal in a couple of minutes. We'll just quickly check here if there's any news on those trades that we talked about earlier today. At this point in time, it looks like there isn't. So definitely, we still have some interesting moves that should be able to be coming. Let me just double check here and see if there's any pieces of news that's happened over the past little while. Yeah, it still looks like there's not too much news going on right now. We're probably in a little bit of the quiet before a storm. We've had a couple of moves earlier today, mostly depth moves, but we've had a little bit of depth moves. We're probably not going to have too much for the next half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Probably won't have overabundance of things going on. And then towards the end of the trade deadline from like 11:15 Pacific time to like 12 p.m. Pacific time when the deadline ends, we're probably going to get a couple more pieces. So stay tuned. We're going to have a couple more trades to talk about for sure. There's always a handful of deals that get done right at 12 o'clock, so don't forget to stay tuned and keep tabs on what's going to happen later today. We do also have to talk about waivers before they happen. The waiver updates will be happening at 11 a.m. Pacific time, so that's only in about half an hour. There were quite a decent amount of players on waivers today, so that's a really interesting move there for the waiver update part of the video. We never talked about this over the past couple of days, so we saw Will Lockwood, Jared Anderson-Dolan, Jacob Mover, and Ryan Johansson all be placed on waivers, not yesterday, but the day prior. Three of them did clear. That was Johansson in Philadelphia, that was Lockwood in Florida, and that was Mover in LA. Like we said, Mover just signed his extension. Johansson was recently traded there. Lockwood's a decent bomb six forward, so not overly surprised that any of those guys got cleared. But the one guy who was claimed was Jared Anderson-Dolan in LA. He was claimed by the Nashville Predators. So that's a really decent pickup. He should be a solid bottom six forward. So for the Predators, and Dolan and Bouvillier are some pretty good pickups there for the Nashville Predators. But on top of that, we saw a ton of players be placed on waivers yesterday. Remember, this is the last day for people to be placed on waivers that could be claimed and still play in the playoffs. So we saw a handful of guys be placed on waivers. That was to include Tobias Bjornfoot in Vegas. Now, the Golden Knights just acquired Noah Hannafin. They have a really stacked blue line. The only reason they acquired Bjornfoot was because they really didn't have too much on their prospect depth when they had some injuries to guys like Theodore Martinez. So we wanted to get a guy like Bjornfoot who can definitely fill in for a short period of time. But with Hannafin being acquired by Vegas, and on top of that, with guys like Theodore Martinez, or Martinez is still injured, but Theodore back, they don't really need Bjornfoot, so they move him down on waivers. Boris Katchouk in Chicago has been placed on waivers. He's a decent bottom six forward. Hasn't really gotten the best of opportunities in Chicago, so he's probably going to clear my guess. We also saw three Carolina Hurricanes who placed on waivers, including Brendan Lemieux, Antti Raanta, and Anthony DeAngelo. Now, we've talked about DeAngelo being potentially a trade candidate for the Carolina Hurricanes to free up some cap space. At this point in time, not exactly sure if they still will or not, but it's it's a decent potentiality there, and I do wonder if they potentially try and add on the blue line. They also got Antti Ranta in Carolina, who's their goaltender. We saw Anderson finally be activated off of injury reserve and get back into game action, so it looks like they're going to run with Ranta and Kochetkov for a time being. So that's a pretty good pickup there for the Carolina Hurricanes. And they also signed Brendan Lemieux on waivers by Carolina Hurricanes. He's a decent bomb 6 forward. Probably would clear, but he's on a cheaper end deal. I do wonder if there's a possibility that he could wind up being claimed. So I do wonder about that. We also saw Calgary and Jordan Oesterle wind up being claimed. And he wound up being placed on waivers. Decent depth defenseman. They acquired Miromanov in the trade. They recently acquired Joel Hanley, so they move Oesterle on waivers to try to make some space for those young blue liners. The Leafs also tried to make some room on their roster. Placed Will Lagesson on waivers. He's a decent depth defenseman. Maybe there's someone out there who claims him, but no guarantees whatsoever. And then we also saw Evan Cormier be placed on waivers by the Florida Panthers. He's a good goaltender. He can definitely work out extremely well as like a solid depth goaltender. So some really good moves there for the Florida Panthers. And those are guys who were placed on waivers. We'll have to wait and see at 11 o'clock. So half an hour from now if those guys are being claimed off of waivers or not. But definitely some interesting waiver updates from the past little while. Still no huge trade rumor updates, no huge signing updates from the past little while. Those are all the waiver updates I want to get to. We did hear a lot of interesting things. What do you think that could happen? Earlier today, there's still some players out there. I wonder about Buchnevich. Could he be moved by St. Louis Blues? There's been a lot of talk about him. The ask seems to be like a 2 first-round picks. I'm not sure if anyone would pay that, but I do wonder about Buchnevich being moved. I also wondered in St. Louis about a guy like Colin Parayko. Could there be a team out there who tries to acquire him? His name has been out there not only this year, but dating back to last year's trade deadline too. I do wonder if there's a team or two out there who take a chance on him, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Vetrano in Anaheim, I do wonder if he's one of the next guys to get moved. Asking price is high on him too, but he's a decent middle 6 forward. He's a really good winger. He's having a career season, so I do wonder if he gets moved. Chychrun in Ottawa, could he get moved? He's a really good forward for the Ottawa Senators, and I do really think that he could. Defenseman for the Ottawa Senators has this year plus next year off on his deal. A lot of people do think that he may wind up resigning there, but with them already having $8 million tied up in both Shabbat and $8 million in Sanderson for the next little while, both being left shot defensemen, do they really want to pay another left shot defenseman $6 to $7 million? It's probably not likely, so that's a pretty good move there for the that could be a pretty good move there for a team that's looking to upgrade on the defensive end. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but it definitely does seem likely that there are going to be some more trades that happen over the next little while. So I definitely have to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this. On top of that, what else could we see from the next little while, trade-wise? Like I said, if you look at my trade list, guys who are still on the board, Pavel Buchnevich, number 1 overall, is still on the board. 2, 3, 4 have gone in Gensel. He's went to Carolina. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, Hanifin and Henrique. Hanifin 2, Gensel 3, Henrique 4. Those guys have all been moved. Allen, who's 5, he could definitely be moved today. The Canadiens have a really logjam goaltending situation, so we could see him be moved. Eberle resigned in Seattle. He's not going to get moved. Toffoli is gone to Winnipeg, so he's been moved. Walker has been moved to Colorado, so he's not getting moved. Kakko, could he be moved by New York Rangers? We've heard a lot of talk about them trying to add another top 6 right winger. Would they move Kakko in order to do that? I'm not exactly sure. So could we see a move like that happen? I definitely wonder if that's a possibility. On top of that, we also have Duclair. He's been moved, so don't really have too much on him. He's been moved by Tampa last year, so that's a pretty decent move by the Bolts, but he's also off the board. Matt Dumba, I wonder about him. He's a solid top 4 defenseman. He hasn't worked out overly well with Arizona, but he can be a really good piece there for the Arizona Coyotes. So that's a pretty good potentiality there for him being moved. We also have Frank Vetrano, who could be moved by the Anaheim Ducks. We have Jacob Markstrom, who could potentially be moved by the Calgary Flames. We also have Alex Barabanov, who could potentially be moved by the San Jose Sharks. Zucker by Arizona, Barry by Nashville, and Chychrun by Ottawa. So we do still have a couple of guys who could potentially wind up being moved. Just a quick recap here. We had a couple of signings earlier today. We're just going to go through a quick recap here. We had 2 signings. First, Parker Wotherspoon signed a 1-year contract extension with the Boston Bruins with the AAV of $800,000. That's a really good pickup there for the Boston Bruins as they keep a solid defenseman who's actually worked out really well as a solid 6/7 D. They also Jordan Eberle has signed a 2-year contract extension with the Seattle Kraken with an AAV of with a 2-year contract extension with the Seattle Kraken with an AV of $4.75 million. It's a really good pickup there for the Kraken to keep him, not having to move him. I think there was a possibility he could have gone like a second-round pick for him, but they did wind up keeping him. He's a solid veteran leader, was taking the expansion draft, so to keep him in the fold, I think is a really good move. And then I love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this, but here's the moves that we've had so far today. Malcolm Subban, depth goalie for the St. Louis Blues, has moved to the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for future considerations. With Washington Capitals have moved Evgeny Kuznetsov with 50% of his contract retained, so $3.9 million cap hit, to the Carolina Hurricanes in exchange for a 2025 third-round pick going to Carolina. The Florida Panthers have acquired Kyle Opozo from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for prospect Kalle Sajalin and a 2024 7th-round pick that could upgrade to a 5th-round pick if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup. We also saw the Anaheim Ducks acquire Ben Meyers from the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a 2024 5th-round pick. We saw the New York Rangers acquire Chad Ruhwedel from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 2027 4th-round pick. We saw a depth player swap between the Minnesota Wild and the New York Rangers, as we saw Nick Baton go to New York in exchange for Turner Ellison. We also saw Tyler Toffoli, number 7 on my trade bait board, be moved. He's dealt to the Winnipeg Jets with 50% of his contract retained, so at a $2.125 million cap hit, to the Winnipeg in exchange for a 2024 third-round pick and a 2025 second-round pick. And then the San Jose Sharks have acquired Callum Costin from the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for Adam Shimmick and a 2024 7th-round pick. So those are all the trades that have happened over the past little while. Lots of interesting moves in the past couple of little while. So a lot of interesting moves there from the past little while. So definitely up to your guys' thoughts on what you think could happen. Could Parayko be moved? Could Chychrun be moved? What will Arizona do? Could they move Zucker and Dumba? Which team do you think has actually done the best so far before a trade deadline? I mean, let's go through teams and what sort of big moves they've made before a trade deadline. We'll start with the Central. Winnipeg's now acquired Tyler Toffoli. They've acquired Sean Monahan. Those are some pretty decent moves there for the Winnipeg Jets. They did have to give up a decent amount of people and picks to get them, but those are some pretty good picks there for the Winnipeg Jets to add some of those players. So yeah, the Jets have added so far this year Monahan and Toffoli. I think that makes that forward group a whole bunch better. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Does those two moves make the Jets a much better team? Go over to the Dallas Stars. I think they've made a couple of moves. Yeah, they made 2 moves, both with the Calgary Flames. They acquired Emilio Pearson, like we said earlier today, decent depth move. And then they also acquired Chris Tanev a couple of days ago. That's a really good move. Top 4 right shot defenseman, defensive defenseman could really help that defensive core. So that's a really good move for the Dallas Stars. Does that make the Dallas Stars a better team? And does that make them one of the favorites in the Central? And then we saw the Colorado Avalanche make a plethora of moves. I mean, the Avalanche have made a handful of moves. So far, since like a couple of a little while ago, they moved Curtis McDermott to the New Jersey Devils to free up some cap space. They then acquired Sean Walker for Ryan Johansson in the first. Then the Milstead Byram swap a couple days ago. That was a pretty good move. They acquired Duhaime for a 3rd-round pick from Minnesota. They acquired Trennan and a prospect for a 3rd-round pick and a prospect Hansel. And they just made a trade earlier today, moving Ben Meyers to the Anaheim Ducks for 5th-round picks. So these moves make the Avalanche better. After these moves have happened over the past a while, which team in the Central Division, as it sits right now, has made the best moves, and which team in the Central Division right now looks more poised to make it out of the first round? Is it Colorado, is it Winnipeg, or is it Dallas? Which one seems the best of those 3 teams? I mean, adding a guy like Tanev to the Dallas Stars D-Corps, adding Toffoli and Monahan to the Jets offensive group, or adding guys like Duhaime, Trennan, Milstead, and Walker to Colorado. Which of those moves were the best ones for the past couple of little while? So definitely, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that. Who do you think is the best team in the Central right now, situated at this point in time? Is it the Avalanche with their moves? Is it the Stars with their moves? Or is it the Jets after their moves. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on who you think so far is the winner of those three teams in the Central. If you look at the top four teams in the Pacific Division, I mean, look at Edmonton so far. What they've done, they've made a couple of moves so far at this point in time. They've made two. They've added Henrique and Carrick from the Anaheim Ducks, and they've also acquired Troy Stecher from the Arizona Coyotes. So they've added a depth forward, a depth defenseman, and the forward who can definitely play third line minutes on that Oilers team. So they've definitely made a couple of additions. Could they make any more moves today? I do wonder about that. On top of that, you have the LA Kings. They really haven't done much this year. They haven't made a single trade since the offseason, so I do wonder if they do make some noise before the trade deadline ends. You look at the Vancouver Canucks. They've made a couple of moves this year. They've actually been one of the more busier teams. If you go back to the beginning of the season, they've made a ton of moves. But if you look at the past little while, I mean, their big acquisitions were Elias Lindholm from Calgary, as well as Nikita Zadorov from Calgary on November 30th. So those were two really good moves there for the Calgary Flames. So definitely, those are some pretty good moves for the from the Canucks to add those pieces. I do wonder if they could potentially make a move. I know there's been some talk out there that they could try and look to add another forward, so I do wonder about that. Vegas has been on fire making moves. They made two significant moves, adding Mantha from Washington for a couple of picks, and then adding Hanifin from Calgary for a couple of picks. There's a lot of talk that Hanifin will probably extend with Vegas. Not sure if it'll be today or potentially in the future, but there's a lot of talk that it will be somewhere around like a $7 million AAV for an 8-year extension, so it does seem like Vegas will probably retain Hanifin for beyond this year, but those are some pretty good moves for Vegas. There's been some talk they could add another forward, so I know a lot of people say Mark Stone's cap circumvention, stuff like that. He's really injured right now, so I definitely do think that that's not like sort of a fake injury or anything. He really, it does sound like he has sort of spleen. I wouldn't be surprised if Stone is out for potentially some parts of the first round, potentially maybe even the entire first round, so it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but which team is so far, in your eyes, is one in the Pacific Division trying to add pieces? Has it been Vegas adding Hanifin and Mantha? Has it been Vancouver adding Lindholm and Zadorov? Has it been Edmonton adding guys like Henry, Carrick, Stecher? Or has it been LA standing pat so far? I mean, which of those teams do you think has made the most improvement so far this year? And which of those teams do you think could make some more moves in the next hour and 20 minutes before the trade deadline? So I definitely have to get your thoughts on that. Going over to the East, you look at some of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. I mean, if you look at the Metro, it's really hard to pinpoint who's buyers, who's sellers. I mean, if you look at the Rangers, they're definitely buyers. They've added a couple of pieces. I mean, they made a prospect swap earlier today. They added Ruedel, which is a really good pickup there on the depth side of things. They also had Wenberg a couple days ago. That's a really good pickup there from the Seattle Kraken as a solid third-line center. So they've definitely made some moves. If you look at the Carolina Hurricanes, we'll talk about this in a couple of seconds, but they made a huge move at acquiring Jake Gensel yesterday night, so that was a really good move there for the Carolina Hurricanes. On top of that, they've also been a third-party broker into the Leah Bushkin deal. They moved Cade Weber to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a depth pick. They've also acquired Evgeny Kuznetsov. I mean, adding Kuznetsov and Gensel, who are proven playoff performers, and when they usually wind up missing out on those big-name players, is a fantastic piece of move there for the Carolina Hurricanes. And it sounds like they do have some interest in signing Gensel to an extension. I do wonder if that also happens. I wonder how long they go, but that could be a really good fit there for Carolina. They need a playoff finisher, someone who can score goals for that team, and that could be a really good fit there for Carolina. So that's a pretty good pickup there. Picking up Gensel, picking up Kuznetsov, who are good top six forwards. On top of that, you got the Philadelphia Flyers, who are in a top 3 spot right now in this Metro, but they also wouldn't be really buyers. I mean, if you look at the teams who are in the playoff race right now, Caps, they've moved out Mantha and Edmondson. Penguins, they've moved out Ruedel, they've moved out Gensel. There's very likely a chance to move out some more pieces. The Islanders, they stand pat. They always stand pat. You look at the Flyers, they've, like we said here, they've made a couple of moves earlier this week. They, like we said, hold on. The Flyers earlier this week have made a couple of moves, including moving Walker to Colorado in exchange for adding a salary dump in Johansson. They were third-party brokers in the Hanifin deal. Besides that, they acquired Drysdale earlier this year. So it looks like they're sort of going for it, but they're still sort of in seller mode right now. So, I mean, if you look at the Metro teams, Jersey, they sold off Toffoli today. So, I mean, all the Metro teams, really 3 through 7, have shown that they're going to be sellers. And the team who should be sellers, 8th in the Metro Division right now in Columbus, hasn't made a move yet. So I do wonder if we see a guy like Rosalik or Provorov be moved for the deadline. So we'll have to wait and see on that. If you look at the Atlantic, if you look at the teams there, I mean, there's been some teams out there who've made some really interesting moves. I mean, if you look at the Panthers, they've added Kyle Pozo and Vladimir Tarasenko so far this week. I mean, those have been some really good additions there that should give them a little bit more of a deeper bottom six going into the playoff race. If you look at the Boston Bruins, at this point in time, they have made a trade with the Minnesota Wild. We'll get to that in a second. But they did pick up Pat Maroon, so that's been their big addition so far. I do wonder if the Bruins do make a couple more moves before a trade deadline. On top of that, you got the Toronto Maple Leafs. They've definitely made a couple of moves. It's mostly been depth defensemen, but they have picked up guys like Joel Edmondson and Ilya Lyabushkin on top of adding a prospect in Cade Weber. So that's a pretty good pickup there for the Leafs. And if you look at the Bolts, they've added a piece too, and like we said a little while ago, talking about the trades that happened yesterday, they added Anthony Duclair, which is a fantastic pickup there. There were third-party brokers in that Henrique deal, so they are adding to the forward group too. Detroit, I think, actually hasn't done much. Just give me a second. Yeah, they made a small trade today, moving Costin for Schmick in a 7th. Besides that, they haven't really done much. So I do wonder if Detroit maybe has a little bit more bigger players. I mean, also the cap difference, Schmick's clear waivers, he's in the AHL right now. Costin's at the NHL level. So the cap difference is $900,000. That does free up for the Red Wings. So I do wonder if that potentially leads to more trades going forward for the Red Wings. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Who do you think has been the biggest winner, buyer-wise, of this deal deadline so far? Has been Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver, Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg, the Rangers, the Bruins, Leafs, Bolts, Panthers, Carolina Hurricanes. Definitely, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on, at this point in time, what you think the best deal at this point is for what the best return has been. Let me know what you think, what the best teams additions have been so far down the chat or in the comment section below. But we do have a couple more trades to discuss. These were the details on the 2 trades that we did not know about. And those are these 2 trades. The Nashville Predators have acquired Jason Zucker. We heard that. We said there was a very likely chance that Zucker was going to Nashville. And the return is a very underwhelming 2024 6th round pick. There's also no retention involved in that sort of a deal. So that's a really interesting move for the Coyotes. I know there was a lot of talk that the Coyotes were looking for a 2024 second round pick, even if it was a later second round pick, and they only get a 6th in return. So I do wonder if that's really a huge important thing for the Coyotes. I mean, I know that they're a seller. They didn't want to be sellers again this year, but they are. So getting a 6th round pick in this year's draft is not too much. It's a depth addition. We know they moved a 2024 7th in a trade yesterday for Troy Stetcher. So it's another depth addition there for the Coyotes. It's a decent pickup there, but it's not a huge pickup there for the Coyotes, and definitely not what they wanted. But they also get Jason Zucker. This is a fantastic pickup there for the Nashville Predators. He signed a 1-year contract this offseason with Arizona, trying to get more playing time after he didn't get brought back by Pittsburgh. Last year at 48 points in 78 games with the Penguins. This year so far only has 25 points in 51 games with the Penguins. I mean, last year he did have one of his better seasons since the 18-19 season with Minnesota. So, I mean, it was a pretty good year for him last year, but hasn't been overly good this year. So hopefully he can go into Nashville. He can be a solid middle six forward with the additions of Beauvillier as well, and with the additions of a guy like Anderson Dolan, who was claimed off of waivers. Hopefully these sort of depth additions help the Predators in their run to try and make the playoffs. So those are some pretty good depth additions there for Nashville Predators. I do like what they have brought so far in terms of trying to add some pieces for just depth picks. I mean, they moved a 5th for Beauvillier, they moved a 6th for Zucker. Those are both pending UFAs, but those are also both late round picks. So those are some pretty good moves there for the Predators. I do really like this deal for a Predators side, but I am a little bit surprised that the Coyotes only got 6 for Zucker. So interesting move there. Meanwhile, for the Bruins, they did acquire Patrick Maroon. The details are now in. Maroon, as entire cap hits, has been moved to the Boston Bruins in exchange for prospect Luke Toropchenko. In exchange for prospect Luke Toporowski and a 2026 6th round pick that's conditional. If Maroon does not play in any 2024 playoff games, the pick is not transferred. So if Maroon plays at some point in the playoffs, then the 6th round pick will be given to the Minnesota Wild. If he doesn't, and let's just say that for some reason he's like a 13th, 14th forward on the Boston Bruins lineup come playoff time, If that happens, then no pick will be transferred to the Minnesota Wild. So it's a pretty good pickup there. I mean, the Bruins, like we said, we know that they need some more physicality on the bottom six. Adding a solid bottom six winger like that, who has a lot of physical attributes, is a fantastic pickup there for the Boston Bruins. I mean, he's had 16 points this year in 49 games after having 14 points last year in 80 games. So he's definitely having one of his better seasons point-wise. I do wonder, he's still a couple of weeks away, I think, from returning. He's currently on long-term injury reserve, or injury reserve, just one of those two. So interesting move there for the Boston Bruins, adding another guy who's going to fit into their bottom six. I mean, we're only a month and a half away from the deadline. I mean, the playoffs starting. So I do think he'll be back way before the playoffs start. But if he doesn't play in any playoff games, that's a decent pickup there for the Wild. So pretty good pickup there for the Bruins to get a solid bottom six forward Maroon. Meanwhile, Toporowski is a decent player. He signed a 3-year ELC with the Boston Bruins in the offseason. He's a left winger. He's an AHL player playing right now. 17 points in 49 AHL games. He's had a pretty good season so far this year. But I do think that this is a really good pickup there for the Wild. He's not going to be a huge prospect. He may not even make the NHL. But this is a decent pickup there for the Wild. And then they also get the conditional 2026 sixth round pick. So it's a pretty good move there for the Wild to get a couple of decent picks in return for Patrick Maroon. So a couple of decent trades now that have been finalized. Zucker to Arizona for a sixth round pick, and Patrick Maroon to Minnesota for a 2026 sixth rounder, and prospect Luke Toporowski. So that's a pretty good pickup there for those teams. Looking at some potential rumors that are going around, let's see if there's any sort of updates here over the past little while. Let's see. We do have an interesting NHL trade to discuss. It sounds like the Montreal Canadiens are going to be moving Jake Allen, number 5 on our trade deadline list. We did think that he was going to get moved, and it sounds like he's going to New Jersey Devils. That's a really interesting pickup there for the Montreal Devils. We know that they need some goaltending help. They've been targeting Markstrom for a long time now. We know how Markstrom's feeling about that. This is an interesting move in trying to add Allen. Given the fact he has this year plus next year left, I do wonder if that means they're out on Markstrom for even in the offseason. So that's an interesting move, in my opinion, for the Devils. I do wonder what the return is and if there's salary retention. I'm not exactly sure on all of the details at this point in time. But we do know that Allen will be heading to the New Jersey Devils. So that's a really interesting move. And number 5 on our trade bait list is now off. So basically, in our top end of the trade bait list, there's only 2 players left, Kako at 9 and Buchnevich at 1. I wonder if those 2 guys get moved. But besides that, all the other guys who have been in my top 10 are gone. So it sounds like that's interesting. So it sounds like there are a couple of other trades. According to Elliot Freeman, it sounds like Allen to New Jersey will happen. On top of that, he sounds like Wade Allison is being dealt by Philadelphia Flyers to maybe Nashville. So that's interesting. It also sounds like Philadelphia is trying to acquire Eric Johnson. So that's going to be an interesting move there. A depth defenseman for the Philadelphia Flyers. That could be a really good pickup there for Philadelphia. So at this point in time, we don't have any confirmation on those deals. On top of that, we also don't have any confirmation on the return on those deals, but it does sound like Eric Johnson is saying from Buffalo to Philly. It sounds like Philadelphia is trading Wade Allison in Nashville, and it sounds like Montreal is moving Jake Allen to the New Jersey Devils. Those are some pretty interesting pickups there from those teams. Lots of interesting moves. I do really wonder if there are a couple more trades that we could see over the next little while. So interesting moves from over the past little while. We do have a couple more interesting things to talk about over the next little while. 9 minutes from now, there will be a couple of interesting pieces of news via the waiver update part of the video. So that could be an interesting piece there. We do have a couple of interesting pieces there. So we're going to have to talk about that in a little bit. The waiver update will happen and not just in future, so we're going to have to talk about that when it happens. But at this point in time, we're about 9 minutes away from the waiver wire happening, or about an hour and 9 minutes away from the deadline. So that's a pretty good, decent pickup there for those teams. So it does sound like, according to some of the reports, it sounds like it's going to be Jake Allen to New Jersey for a conditional third, which can be a second. Not exactly sure on that, but it does sound like that's probably going to be happening. And it does sound like Allen will be retained 50% of his salary. So that's Montreal's last retention slot for this year. They did retain Edmondson, who's coming off the books this offseason. So they're going to have some retention slots available next offseason. But for this upcoming season, for the rest of the trade deadline, they won't have any retention slots. So it's a pretty good pickup there for the Devils to get Allen at $1.9 million. And on top of of that, I do wonder what this means for Jacob Markstrom. Does he still get moved, whether it be before a deadline, after the deadline, in the offseason? And if so, is it to New Jersey, or is there someone else who gets moved to it? Definitely. It's going to be an interesting situation to show for either over the next hour and potentially leading into the offseason. So it does sound like there's going to be some talk about Allen going to New Jersey now. I do wonder if it's official. Not exactly yet, but I do think we're going to have some official confirmation about that in a little bit. Looking at about some other things we could see from the last little while. Let's see. Yeah, so it sounds like that. So it does sound like Erik Johnson's going to Philadelphia. Philly's trading Wade Allison to Nashville, and the Devils are getting Jake Allen. Just got to confirm those things in a second. It sounds like there's going to be a 4th round pick heading to the It sounds like there's going to be a 4th round pick heading to Buffalo in exchange for the Erik Johnson stuff. So that seems like it's going to be a pretty decent deal. It sounds like we said, just trade went down. Jake Allen sounds like he's going to New Jersey with half of his contract retained, so a $1.9 million cap hit to New Jersey in exchange for a 3rd round pick that could become a 2nd round pick. Not sure exactly the conditions on it, but that's sort of what we're hearing about the Jake Allen stuff right now. So it does sound like that's sort of where we are in the Allen. Definitely seems like that's potentially where we are right now on the Allen stuff. We also got a couple of other interesting trade rumors that we could see over the next little while. I do wonder if we see a move from St. Louis. They've been quite quiet today and over the past couple of days. Looking at some teams who could definitely make some moves, who haven't really been busy over the past little while. I mean, LA comes to mind. The Kings were one of the teams who were rumored on Tyler Toffoli. They were rumored about trying to maybe add a goaltender. They have a lot of injuries right now. None of them are going to be out for the rest of the regular season, so they can't place any of them on long-term injury reserve. So I do wonder if the Kings do anything. There was some talk late last night that the Kings were one of the teams who were talking about adding a goaltender, so I do wonder if maybe there's still potentiality there. Maybe they go after a guy like Markstrom, or there's been some talk about Ullmark. Maybe they try and add him. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but I do wonder if we see some sort of a deal from the LA Kings to try and improve. I mean, we saw Edmonton upgrade, we've seen Vegas upgrade, we've seen Vancouver upgrade in the Pacific. I mean, there's been some talk about Vegas adding a forward, Vancouver adding a forward, maybe adding another piece in Edmonton. So I do wonder if any of those 3 guys who end up adding at this point in time. Colorado's been very busy adding pieces. Dallas has added defenseman in Tanev. Jets have added up front. There's been some talk still about adding a depth defenseman on Winnipeg. I do wonder about that. There's been some talk about adding another depth defenseman in Dallas. I wonder about that. So those could be some teams we'll look out for over the next little while. We also have some of the other teams. Preds have made a couple of small additions, adding guys like Bouvillier and Zucker. So they've been pretty busy so far over the past little while. Traded Trenton as well. So those are some pretty good deals. I do wonder about Tyson Barrie. He's on my trade bait list. I do wonder if he gets moved. So we'll have to wait and see on Barrie. On top of that, you got the other teams who are out of the playoff spot right now, who are potentially looking to make some moves. I mean, like we said, Seattle, they moved Wenberg. They re-signed Eberle. I do wonder about some of their defensemen like Schells and Dumoulin. We know they're not moving guys like Larson, Dunn, some of the other top 4 defensemen, but I do think there's a very likely possibility that they could try and move a guy like Dumoulin or Schells before deadline, so we'll have to watch out for them. Flames have basically made most of their moves. They moved all the UFAs that they said they would. Lindholm, Hanifin, Zadorov, and Tanev. They're all gone. I do wonder if they consider maybe making one more move. Could they move a guy like Mangiapane? Could they move a guy like Sharon Govich? Could they move a guy like Andrei Kuzmenko? I do wonder about those guys. If not right now, those will probably be more off-season or next year's trade deadline moves. I do wonder about Markstrom. Could he be moved? Is there a team out there now with Allen going to Jersey? It seems that that's really unlikely. So if it's not Jersey, could Markstrom go to a different place? Definitely going to be interesting to see. Going over to the Blues, I mean, like I said, they've been very, very quiet. Could they move Parayko? Could they move Buchnevich? Could they move a couple of pending UFAs? It's going to be interesting to see, but I do really expect the Blues to definitely be making some moves, so we'll have to wait and see on that. On top of that, Could we see the Ducks make some more moves? They moved Henrique already and Carrick. That's not the moving Gibson. They've moved Bushkin. I wonder about Vetrano. Could we see Vetrano be moved? San Jose, they've moved Duclair. They've acquired Klim Kostin. There's been a lot of talk about Barabanov over the past while. I wonder if he gets moved. There's been a lot of talk about the Capo Kakkonen in San Jose. Could he be a depth goalie addition for a team or two? There's been some talk about Mikael Granlund and Mario Ferraro, who have term. I do wonder if there's a possibility those two could potentially get moved by the San Jose Sharks. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but I do expect more moves out of the Sharks in the next hour. Could we see some moves out of the Blackhawks? I mean, I don't think it's very likely that the Blackhawks do very much more than after moving Beauvillier. I mean, there's a very likely chance they could move Colin Blackwell, potentially guys like Ty Johnson, or a guy like on the defensive end, Jared Tenorti. So I do think there's a possibility those two guys could get moved, but besides that, the Hawks really don't have too much trade chips, so I'm not sure if they'll move anymore. We've seen Zucker and Stetcher be dealt by the Arizona Coyotes. I wonder about Dumba. Could he get moved? There's been a lot of chatter around Bugstead, Kerfoot. Could either of those two guys be moved? Definitely. It's going to be interesting to see if those guys get moved, and if those guys do get moved, can they get a better return than they did for Zucker, which was a 6th-round pick? So it'll be interesting to see there. On top of that, in the Eastern Conference, we've seen the Rangers add a guy like Wenberg, Ruedel. Could we see him add a top 6 winger? We've seen guys like Carolina add Gensel, Kuznetsov. Do they have any moves in them? The Flyers, they've moved Walker. They've facilitated the Hanifin deal. They've acquired Eric Johnson, according to some reports. So could they make some more moves? I think it's quite possible. Could we see the Leafs make some more moves? They made a couple of depth adds on the defensive end, Edmondson, Leah Bushkin, so I do wonder about that. Could we see the Florida Panthers make some more moves? They've added some more bottom 6 forwards like Tarasenko, like Opozo. Could they make some more additions? I think that's a possibility. Could we see the Bruins make some moves? They've added Maroon. That's basically been their only move. Could they look to add something on the defensive end? Could they look to add something on the center group? Could guys like DeBrusk or Grzelcyk be moved? That's a possibility. Could we see the Bolts make some more moves? They've added Duclair. They still haven't addressed their blue line situation, so I do wonder if they try and add a blue liner, even if it's just a depth guy. I do wonder about Detroit. They really haven't made much moves. They've moved Kostin. That's the extent of what they've been doing so far. So I do wonder if the Red Wings make some moves. I do wonder if teams who are out of a playoff spot, how many more moves they make. Devils, according to some reports, we're listening on guys like Brendan Smith, Colin Miller. Could those guys be moved? Could we see guys like could the Islanders make some moves? They haven't made anything as of right now. It's something they want to add. There's some talk the Wallstromers on the market, so could they make some moves? Capitals have moved Edmondson, they've moved Mantha. Could they move guys like Pacioretty, Oshie, Dowd? I think it's a possibility too. Could the Penguins move guys like Riley Smith, Marcus Peterson? There's some talk about Alex Nedeljkovic. I think that's a possibility too. Could we see the Jackets move guys like Provorov and Roslovic? That's a possibility. Could we see the Senators move Kubalik? It's a little bit less likely. Could we see move Brandstrom or Chychrun? That's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for over the next hour. Could we see the Canadians make some more moves? They move Allen now. They can't retain any more money. They still have Savard under contract. Could they move Savard? It's possible. Could they move Jordan Harris? I think that's another possibility. So we'll have to wait until the Canadians. The Sabres have moved Opozo. They moved Derek Johnson. Do they move a guy like Jurgensen? Do they move Victor Olofsson? Could they go out and add a couple of pieces too? I do wonder about that. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But what moves do you think we'll still see before the trade deadline winds up passing? And what sort of moves do you think could wind up happening? So interesting stuff there. So far, all in all, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you include the Allen, Johnson, and Allison deals, we've had 13 trades this year so far on deadline day. We had 19 last year, so there's bound to be a handful of them before the trade deadline actually passes. There's probably going to be like a handful of them right at 12 o'clock, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But it does sound like there is some more interesting trades that are going to be happening over the next little while. It is 11 o'clock, so as soon as we get the waiver updates, we will let you know who's been claimed, who's been cleared, and if there's anyone new on waivers. So I do wonder about that. So if there's anything new on waivers, I will touch on that. On top of that, looking at the waiver update here from the past little while, let's see. We have no waiver updates as of yet, but there's a very likely chance we could get some in the not just in future. So don't forget to stay tuned for that. We will be talking about the waiver update over the past little while. So definitely, let's hear your guys' thoughts. Who do you think has been the biggest adder at this year's trade deadline? Is it the Rangers with Wenberg and Ruido so far? The Hurricanes adding Guentzel and Kuznetsov? Is it the Bolts adding Duclair? Is it the Leafs adding Edmondson and Leo Bushkin? Is it the Panthers adding Tarasenko and Opozo? Is it the Bruins adding Maroon? Is there any more moves out of those Eastern Conference teams? And who do you think has upgraded the most in the West? Is it the Predators adding Anderson Dolan, Bouvillier, Jason Zucker? Is it the Golden Knights adding Hanifin and Mantha? Is it the Oilers adding Henrique and Carrick and Stetcher? Is it the Canucks adding Zadorov and Lindholm? Is it the Avalanche adding guys like Middlestat, Trennan, Duhaime, and Walker? Is it the Stars adding Tanev? Is it the Jets adding Monahan and Toffoli? Is it the Kings who really haven't done anything, the Red Wings who really haven't done anything? Who has been the best teams who have had additions so far this year? Who's done the best? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the chat or in the comment section below. Who has been the best team so far to sort of add pieces to this deal? So definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. So it's going to be interesting to see. We do have a couple of interesting pieces of news already so far. It does sound like the waivers are going to be happening in the not distant future. I do wonder who's going to be claimed, who's not going to be claimed. There were a couple of Carolina Hurricanes on waivers. Will Lagesson in Toronto. It does seem like there were a couple of claims, and there is a couple of more trades to discuss. Let's look at this here. Trades. It sounds like Andrew Peeke is going to Boston, so that might be the Boston Bruins defensive upgrade. The Ottawa Senators have claimed Boris Tkachuk, and the Florida Panthers have claimed Tobias Bjornfot off of waivers. So those are some interesting waiver claims. We'll see exactly if there's anyone else who's been claimed, or if there is everyone else who's been cleared. Or if everyone else who's been cleared is indeed cleared and has been cleared. And it's been cleared off of waivers, so we'll double check that here. So far, still nothing concrete in time, but it sounds like Boris Tkachuk is going from Chicago to Ottawa, and Tobias Bjornfot is going from Vegas to Florida. So those are going to be some interesting waiver updates in the past little while. Going over to a couple more moves. It sounds like Andrew Peeke is heading to Columbus, from Columbus to Boston. It sounds like that's going to be the Boston Bruins defensive addition, so that could be a really good pickup there for the Bruins. Peake's a really good defensive defenseman. He's more of a third pair defenseman and can really work well on that third pair defenseman, the defensive role, so I do wonder if that's a really good pickup there for the Boston Bruins. Now, we haven't talked about this yet. We only have an hour left before trade deadline. I do want to discuss this before it gets too late. Yesterday, we did see a massive deal between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, it happened so late, I never got around to touching on this, but the Carolina Hurricanes acquired Jake Guentzel with 25% of his contract retained, so at a $4.5 million cap hit, and defenseman Ty Smith, who's in the AHL right now, from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Michael Bunting, prospect Vasily Ponomarov, prospect Cruz Lucius, prospect Ville Koivunen, a 2024 second-round pick that's Philadelphia's, that can't upgrade to a 2024 first-round pick, which is Carolina's, if the Carolina Hurricanes make it to the Stanley Cup final. So if they win the first round, the second round, and the third round, and are in the Cup final, then that second-round pick will be upgraded to a first-round pick, and the 2024 fifth-round pick, which is also conditional, which only gets transferred if the Carolina Hurricanes win the Stanley Cup final. So it's very likely that that 2024 fifth-round pick, unless the Carolina Hurricanes are the team to hoist the Stanley Cup this year, that pick won't be dealt. So that's going to be interesting to see. But that was a massive deal we saw last night. I'll just break it down here. The Carolina Hurricanes, who have always been around the big name players but never gotten them, finally trade a huge package in exchange for going for it this year. They are able to get Guentzel, who's a left winger, right winger. He's a pending UFA. There's a lot of talk he wants to go to market, so we'll have to wait and see on that. He's currently injured. He'll probably injure for another week, 10 days will be my guess, and then he'll be able to come back and be a solid addition there for the Carolina Hurricanes. He's got 52 points so far this year in 50 games. Like I said, he's injured right now. Last year had 73 points in 78 games. He's a consistent 30 to 40 goal scorer. He's put up over a point per game at multiple points of his career, so it's a very good pickup there. And 466 NHL games, he has 503 NHL games, he has 466 NHL points. So it's a very good pickup there for the Carolina Hurricanes, adding a guy like Jake Gensel to that team. They also had Ty Smith. Now, Smith has never worked out in Pittsburgh. He was acquired as part of the Mike Matheson deal from the... he was acquired as part of the John Marino deal from the New Jersey Devils. He was brought in to be sort of like a third pair defenseman. He never really even gone to any NHL action. I mean, in Pittsburgh, he was more of an AHL defenseman. He got into 4 points in 9 games of NHL action last year, and then had 24 points in 39 AHL games last year. This year has 32 points in 51 AHL games this year. So he really never worked out in Pittsburgh, so hopefully on the Carolina Hurricanes blue line, we know they have a lot of pending UFAs this year, including guys like Tony DeAngelo, Brady Shea, and Brett Pesce. So it definitely seems like those guys could potentially be moved. So it seems like Smith is sort of like a addition just in case those guys do end up getting moved and they need some more depth on their defensive end. So that was a pretty good deal for the Carolina Hurricanes. But the asking price was a pretty high one. So you get a conditional 2024 5th-round pick is the Carolina Hurricanes. If the Hurricanes win the Stanley Cup, it's transferred. If it's not, it remains in Carolina. So that's a pretty good move. That's the 2024 2nd-round pick. That's Philadelphia. It's going to Pittsburgh. On top of that, if the Carolina Hurricanes make it to a Cup final, it upgrades to a first-round pick, which I think if they do make it to a Cup final, they'll be absolutely fine giving a first-round pick to Pittsburgh, so that's an interesting move. And then you have 4 players in the deal. Now, they move Michael Bunting, who is this year plus 2 more seasons left at a $4.5 million cap hit, is a really good left winger. Signed this deal just this past offseason, so you don't usually see guys who sign multi-year deals get moved the offseason following, but it's a really interesting move. I mean, Bunting had 49 points last year with Toronto, had 63 points the year prior. This year has been more put in a reduced role in Carolina, only has 36 points in 60 games. Done all right, but not as good as he's done in Toronto. Now, Dubas, who is the GM of Pittsburgh, used to be the GM of Toronto. He brought in Michael Bunting and really made him work extraordinarily well, so I don't think this is any surprise that Bunting is going to Pittsburgh, and he should be able to be a solid middle 6 forward for this year, plus 2 more seasons for Pittsburgh Penguins, so it's a pretty good pickup there for the Penguins. Then they also get 3 really good pickups on the prospect side of things. They got Vasily Ponomarev, who's a 2020 2nd-round pick. He's a center. He's in the final year of his ELC, so he's going to probably need a new deal after this year. He got into 2 games of NHL action last year, putting up 2 actually this year. He's gone to 2 NHL games of NHL. He's gone into 2 games of NHL action this year, putting up a goal and an assist and 2 points. He's gone into 39 AHL games, putting up 29 AHL points. So this is a pretty good pickup there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, they don't have too many good prospects. Ponomarev looks like he could eventually be a solid 3rd-line center, so this is a pretty good pickup there for the Carolina Hurricanes. They also got Cruz Lucius, who's the brother of Chaz Lucius in Winnipeg. He hasn't signed an NHL contract yet. He's still playing over in junior college. He's a 4th-round pick back in the 2022 draft. He's a right winger. He so far has 31 points in 32 games over in the NCAA. It would not surprise me at all, given the fact he's a 2nd year over in the NCAA. If in the next little bit he signs a new deal with the Pittsburgh Penguins and maybe comes over and plays a couple of games with the Penguins, I would not be overly surprised if that happens. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but that could be a really good pickup there for the Pittsburgh Penguins, getting Cruz Lucius. And then they also get Ville Koivunen. Now, Koivunen was a 2021 2nd-round pick, so they get a former 2nd-round pick, a former 4th-round pick, and a former 2nd-round pick. So those are some pretty good pickups there for the Penguins. Koivunen is this year plus 2 more seasons left on his ELC, so he's still signed for quite some time on his ELC. He's playing this year over in Carpet, over in Liga. He so far has 55 points in 57 games over there, so he could be a really good pickup there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So and he plays, let me just see here, right wing. So there are some pretty good pickups there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So they get a right winger in Koivunen, they get a right winger in Lucius, and they get a center in Ponomarev. They get a solid middle 6 forward in Bunting, and they get a potential 2nd or 1st round pick in 2024, and a potential 5th round pick in 2024 in exchange for moving Jake Gensel with 25% of his contract retained, and Ty Smith. So this is a pretty good deal for both sides. I do think that the Penguins are sort of the winners of the I do think actually the Carolina Hurricanes are sort of the winners of this deal. The Hurricanes add Gensel. They're a team who's been wanting to upgrade so much. I mean, look at all the names we've heard them been linked to over the past 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. They've been linked to all the big names, but they never seem to get them. They finally do. They move the assets. They're not a team who's usually going out there and moving picks and prospects for rentals. They're able to do that here, and they do have a really strong feeling that they're able to sign Jake Gensel. So this is a really good pickup there for the Canes to add Gensel as well as Ty Smith, who should be able to help as a depth defenseman. But still, it's also a really good pickup there for the Pittsburgh Penguins to add Bunting, Ponomarov, Koivunen, Lucius, and then 2 picks in exchange for moving Gensel. It's not the return I think everyone wanted. I think they wanted a guaranteed first-round pick plus a couple of picks and prospects too, but it's a pretty decent deal in my opinion for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So a lot of interesting stuff from over the past little while, and we do have a couple of waiver updates to talk about from the past little while. The waiver updates have concurred, so we do have a couple of waiver updates. It does seem like not all the waiver updates have been confirmed yet, but Tobias Bjornfot has been claimed off of waivers by the Florida Panthers from the Vegas Golden Knights, so he'll be added to that defensive group for the Florida Panthers. It's a pretty good pickup there for the Panthers. They have a pretty good stacked defensive core, but adding another young defenseman like Bjornfot will be a very fantastic move there for the Panthers. So really good stuff there. We're about 45 minutes away from the trade deadline passing, so we're probably gonna have a couple more moves over the next little while. Let's look at some things that some of the insiders are saying right now. So it seems like Andrew Peeke still sounds like he's going to Boston, but there's still no official reports on that. Let's look at some other people. Let's see what they're saying. Yeah, it doesn't sound like... yeah, Peeke sounds like he's trading to Boston, Allen to Jersey. It does sound like that's sort of the consensus of what's happening right now. Do wonder about if there's going to be some other moves. It does sound like there are 3 claims of the waiver wire. So it sounds like Sens have claimed Boris Tkachuk from Chicago, Panthers have claimed Tobias Bjornfot from Florida, and Ducks have claimed Will Lagesson from Toronto. It seems like those are sort of the waiver updates from the past little while. Yeah, so those are the 3 waiver claims. Lagesson is claimed by the Ducks, Tkachuk by the Senators, and Bjornfot by the Panthers. So these are all pretty good deal moves. The Ducks don't have a really deep blue line, so adding a Lagesson has actually worked out quite well in the Leafs blue line this year. It's a pretty good move in my opinion. Adding Boris Tkachuk in Ottawa, it's a pretty decent acquisition too. I mean, Tkachuk adding a bomb sex forward in Ottawa is a fantastic move. And they also have Tobias Bjornfot. Bjornfot's a decent third pair defenseman who can work out really well in Florida's defensive group. So it seems like those were the 3 waiver claims. So it seems like the other guys, D'Angelo, Raanta, and Lemieux, all in Carolina. Osterley in Calgary, and Cormier in Florida have all cleared waivers. It sounds like they'll be sent down to the minors. So interesting moves there. I do wonder if we still see a D'Angelo trade, or if Raanta gets moved, or Raanta will probably just play in the minors for now. So it'll be interesting to see, but those are some players who are placing waivers who do wind up clearing. So interesting moves there. So we do have a couple more things that we're going to have to talk about soon. Hopefully these trades that are on right now are going to be happening in not just in future. We do have a couple of decent trades that should be coming on in not just in future. We do have one of the deals that has been taking place. Eric Johnson is heading to Philadelphia in exchange for a 2024 4th-round pick to Buffalo. So it's not a bad move there for the Sabres. They brought him in as like a veteran leader on the defensive group. He fit in extremely well. He was a really good defensive leader, on the veteran leader on that forward group, but he never really worked out overly well. And with him being a pending UFA, they want to get him to a place where he can really do really good stuff. So they moved him to Philadelphia. Flyers just lost Sean Walker, so they are able to add a solid pending UFA in Eric Johnson. It's not straying away too much from their plan of trying to be a seller. I mean, they add a 2024 4th-round pick in order to do this, so it's not a huge move there for the Philadelphia Flyers. I mean, they can move a 4th-round pick to try and go for it this year, so it's not a bad move there for Philadelphia. It's a decent move. I mean, they don't have a horribly experienced blue line, so adding a veteran and playoff-proven defenseman like this, just in case they do make the playoffs, is a pretty good move there for the Flyers. I mean, he's got 3 goals in 50 games so far this year with Buffalo. Not a huge person who's on my trade bait list, but he is one of the guys who was on my trade bait list, so that's a pretty good pickup there for the Philadelphia if you have Flyers, to get a solid veteran leader in Erik Johnson, who knows what it takes to win the playoffs. So it's a really good pickup there for the Flyers. Sabres are never going to bring back Johnson. He was probably gone in the offseason as well, so they are able to get a 4th-round pick out of it. Decent pickup there, sort of like the Opposo deal, move him to a contender and get whatever they can for him. So it's a pretty good pickup there for the Buffalo Sabres. But Erik Johnson was, just let me double check here. Erik Johnson was number, let's see here, hold on a sec. Erik Johnson was number, just give me a second here. He was number 24 on my list, on my trade bait list. So Erik Johnson, 24, off my trade bait list. Let's just look at some of the guys who are on my trade bait list still. Let's look at these guys who have not been traded yet. So number 1, Pavel Buchnevich, as you can see in the top corner, still not traded. I do wonder if we see a Buchnevich deal before our trade deadline, so we'll have to wait and see on that. The other 4 guys in the top 5 are dealt, as is Eberle, Toffoli, Walker, or at least not on the trade board anymore. Kakko in New York down here, he's still available. I do wonder if the Rangers move him. If you look at Matt Dumba in the corner here, top 4 right shot defenseman, I do think the Coyotes will move him before the trade deadline. He may be some sort of like a John Klingberg of this year's trade deadline. He's a little bit cheaper, but sort of like they move him right at the last minute for like whatever they can get for him. So I do wonder if that's a potentiality move there for the Arizona Coyotes. Frank Vatrano, 12th on my trade bait list. I do wonder if he gets moved. Solid top 6 winger. Yeah, not overly abundance of cap space, but is a high asking price. So I wonder if he gets moved. Markstrom, 13th, with the addition of Allen. I don't think he's going to Jersey anymore. Would he waive to go somewhere else? It's going to be interesting to see. But I have Markstrom at 13 still available. Barabanov at 14 still available. Like we said, the Sharks are moving off as many pieces as they can. So I do wonder if he gets moved. Zucker is now gone. I do wonder about Barry. He's a really good top 4 defenseman, can play offensive minutes. I do wonder if the Preds still move him, try and give him a fresh start after not having a great season this year. Jacob Chychrun in Ottawa, I do wonder if he gets moved this year plus next year, $4.6 million cap hit. I do think it's a possibility, but a little bit less likely than the other ones. And then if you look at the other ones that I have on my top 50 trade bait list, Lawton, 21, still hasn't been moved. Peronovich, 22, still hasn't been moved. Some of the contenders' first-round picks, including Colorado's, Vegas's, and Toronto's, still haven't been moved. Nedeljkovic in Pittsburgh hasn't been moved. Ferraro in San Jose, David Savard in Montreal, Kevin Labanc in San Jose, John Gibson in Anaheim, Bukestad in Arizona, Roslovic in Columbus, Parayko in St. Louis, Riley Smith in Pittsburgh, Vic Olofsson in Buffalo, Oliver Wahlstrom in New York Dominic Kubalik in Ottawa, as well as Brancham in Ottawa, Provorov in Columbus, Boqvist in Columbus, Schultz in Seattle, Tyler Johnson in Chicago, Morgan Frost in Philadelphia, Broberg in Edmonton, as well as CC, D'Angelo in Carolina, Marchment in Dallas. Those guys are all still on my trade bait list, so I do wonder how many guys are going to be moved by the trade deadline who are on my trade bait list right now. It does still seem we're going to need to get some more confirmation about the Peak trade, about the Allen trade, about the Allison trade, so we still have some waiting to do about those 3 trades. We do have a couple of decent trades that have happened so far. Really nothing overly significant happening at this point in time, so we do have a couple of interesting pieces of notes there. Like we said, waiver updates, I think they're all gone now. Yeah, so Cormier, Osterley, Lemieux, Anta, and D'Angelo all cleared, so interesting moves there. So Canes are able to keep all 3 of their players, and the Flames are able to keep a solid bomb 6 defenseman, or bomb pair defenseman. So some pretty good moves there. So we do have probably a couple more trades that are going to happen over the next little while. I do wonder about Peak, about some of the other ones. We should have some confirmation about those ones in the not distant future. There's only 40 minutes left before our trade deadline, so it seems like we're going to have a really interesting thing. Definitely it seems like we are going to have some more trades in the next little while. I do really wonder about guys like Buchnevich and Vatrano, Dumb on the defensive end, Chychrun on the defensive end. Which teams missed out on those guys are going to swing around to try and add those guys. So I do think we're still going to have, my guess will be somewhere between 5 and 10 trades at the very least. We usually have a handful of deals happen right at the deadline, and I'm not saying they're all going to be overly significant. There's usually a pick for pick or prospect for prospect trade or something like that, or like a depth player for a depth player. There usually always is. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But just to recap some of the moves that have happened today. For all of you guys who are just joining us, Jordan Eberle signed a 2-year contract extension with the Seattle Kraken, AAV of $4.75 million, so he's not moving anywhere. Parker Weatherspoon signed a 1-year contract extension with the Boston Bruins with an AAV of $800,000, so he's not going anywhere. So those are some pretty good pickups there for the Bruins and the Kraken to sign some of their players. We then saw a couple of moves. Malcolm Subban was dealt by the Blues to the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for future considerations. The Capitals dealt Kuznetsov with half of his contract retained to the Carolina Hurricanes in exchange for a 2025 third-round pick. The Florida Panthers are able to acquire Kyle Oposo from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Kalle Sijalin and a 2024 7th-round pick, which is conditional and could return to a 5th if the Panthers win the Cup. We also have signed a couple of other trades, including Ruhwedel being dealt to New York by Pittsburgh for a 2027 4th-round pick, Ben Meyers being dealt to the Colorado Avalanche to the Anaheim Ducks for a 2024 5th-round pick. Nick Paton being dealt by the Minnesota Wild to New York Rangers in exchange for Turner Ellison, so that's a pretty good pickup there for the New York Rangers. Toffoli was dealt to the Jets with half of his contract retained in exchange for a 2025 2nd-round pick and 2024 3rd-round pick. Those are some pretty good moves there for the Jets. Klim Kostin has been dealt by the San Jose Sharks, acquired by the San Jose Sharks, but from the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for Ram Shimmick and a 24 7th-rounder. Zucker's been acquired by Nashville Predators in exchange for a 24 6th-rounder. Maroon's been acquired by the Boston Bruins in exchange for Toporowski and a 26 6th-rounder. That's conditional and could be transferred if Maroon plays in one playoff game. And then they also have Eric Johnson being dealt to the Philadelphia Flyers in exchange for a 4th-round pick. And we're waiting confirmation on the Peak to Boston deal, the Allison to Philadelphia deal, and the Allen to Montreal deal. So, Allen to New Jersey deal. So those are some interesting moves that we still have to wait for over the next little while. But definitely, that was some interesting moves for sure, nonetheless, that have happened over the past little while. So we definitely have a lot of moves to talk about over the next little while. I expect there to be tons of trades over the next 35-ish minutes before the trade deadline passes. So we do have a couple of things we do have to probably look out for. With it being a little bit slow right now, I'm just going to take a quick look at the standings here. If you guys don't know the standings as of right now, I'll go once by point percentage and once by points, just to give you guys both the sort of landscape of how it's looking right now in the wild card race. So if you look at the wild card race in the East right now, if you look at the points and points percentage, it's really not all that too different. If you look at it via point and points percentage, there is one significant change. So top 3 teams are exactly the same in the Eastern Conference if you go by points or points percentage. It's Rangers 1 with 84 points, Canes 2 with 80 points, and Flyers 3 with 74 points. And in the Atlantic, it's 90-point Florida leading the Atlantic, followed by 89-point Boston, 80-point Toronto. Now, if you look at this via points-wise in the wildcard race, you currently have, at this point in time, hold on, 72-point Detroit being first wildcard and 72-point Tampa being second wildcard. They're followed by 70-point NYI, 67-point Washington, 66-point Jersey, 64-point Pittsburgh, 63-point Buffalo, 58-point Montreal, 54-point Ottawa, 54-point Columbus, and those are teams that I was looking at right now in the Eastern Conference. But if you go by points percentage, then it's actually Detroit who's and NYI who are in the wildcard spots. They're followed by Tampa, Washington, and then Pittsburgh and Jersey flip-flop. So Pittsburgh's have New Jersey points percentage-wise, and then you have Buffalo, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. So a couple of small changes in the lineup if you go by points percentage-wise, and that is the Islanders are in a playoff spot, not the Bolts, and that is that the Penguins are ahead of the Devils. So not too surprising there, but those are a couple of interesting moves if you swap around via points percentage-wise. If you look at the top 3 in the if you look at the top 3 in the Pacific and the Central, not too much changes there. You have the 85-point Stars leading the Central, followed by 85-point Winnipeg and 83-point Colorado, and you have 89-point Vancouver leading the Pacific, followed by 78-point Edmonton, 75-point LA. But if you go by points percentage-wise, the Pacific's the same. There's one change in the Central, and that's Dallas-Winnipeg swap. So Dallas would actually be first team in the Central. Winnipeg would actually be first team in the Central. Dallas will be second team in the Central. And if you look by points percentage-wise in the teams who are outside who are on the outside looking right now in the playoff race. If you go by points wise, it's currently 75 point Nashville first wild card, 73 point Vegas second wild card, and they're followed by 67 point Calgary, Seattle, and St. Louis, 66 point Minnesota, 55 point Arizona, 49 point Anaheim, 37 point San Jose and Chicago. But if you go by point percentage wise, there's a couple of things that do change. Actually, there's not too much that changes. It's still Nashville, Vegas, Calgary, Seattle, St. Louis, Minnesota, Arizona, Anaheim, San Jose, Chicago. So there's only a few things that change points percentage-wise. We're at that point of the season now where most of the teams are within a game or two of each other. So there's not really that much difference points percentage-wise than points-wise. The points percentage-wise, the only things that are different are Winnipeg winning the Central Division instead of Dallas, the Islanders who made the playoffs instead of the Lightning, and the Penguins are a little bit ahead of the New Jersey Devils. So those are the only two things that happen points-wise in the playoff picture right now that has happened. So interesting stuff there. And then we also have a couple of other interesting things to talk about. Just give me a second. So let's check on some other things that could wind up happening. Let's see if there's any more updates. It sounds like, according to David Pagnotta, the Red Wings are looking for a forward to try and improve their forward group. They only got 33 minutes left to do it, so they're going to have to try and find a way to do something. But it does sound like David Pagnotta is saying that this team is sort of looking to try and improve their forward position. It does sound like Peak will be moved to Boston as soon as that winds up happening. It does sound like a part of the return is Jacob Zaboral from Boston, so that could be a guy who goes back to Columbus. That could be a really good fit for the Jackets. It does sound like interesting stuff there, how Allen's been moved to New Jersey. It sounds like the condition will be if Allen plays 40 or more games between this year and next year, the Devils will transfer the second instead of the third. So the Allen condition really seems to be dependent on how many games he plays. So that's going to be an interesting position to look out for. See if there's any other things to talk about right now. Let's see. Not really much news here as of yet. I expect this to pick up over the next 10-15 minutes heading into the later portion of the trade deadline. So I do expect there to be a couple more moves before we end the stream here. Like I said, I'm probably going to go till about 12:31ish, just because I really wanted to touch on whatever trades do trickle down after the midnight, after the noon trade deadline. Like I said, the deadline is at noon, but there's always trades that trickle down that happen at like 11:59, 11:58, panic trades by some of these seller teams. So I do think there's a very likely chance that we could see some trades in not too distant future. Let's see exactly what else. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's really much anything right now. So we're still waiting confirmation on the Allen details for a full exact thing, the Peak details and some of the other details. But some interesting moves have happened today. Let's see. There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. If you include the Boston Bruins one and the Flyers one and the Allen one, there's been, I think, 14 trades this so far today. I expect there to be at least 5 to 10 more before the before the deadline passes. So it will be interesting to see exactly who ends up getting moved, but we definitely do have some interesting things. Which team has been the best seller so far, according to your thing? Which team has been the best seller, according to what you think? I'd love to hear guys' thoughts. Is it the Arizona Coyotes who've been the best seller? Anaheim Ducks, Arizona Coyotes, Anaheim Ducks, San Jose Sharks, Chicago Blackhawks, has been some of the other teams. Kraken, Flames, Wild, has the Jackets, Senators, what other teams? Buffaloes, they've been the best sellers. Have Pittsburgh been the best sellers? Washington, Philadelphia, even though they're in a playoff spot, have they been the best sellers? Definitely. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in either the chat or the comment section on who you think has been actually the best sellers of this trade deadline, down in the comment section below or down in the chat, whatever you guys want to do. But still, lots of interesting pieces still to move. Like we talked about, we still have a couple of pieces on our trade bait list that are still on there. However, 8 of our top 10 players have been moved, as we talked about before. Hannafin, who was at number 2, has been dealt to Vegas. Gensler, who was number 3, has been dealt to Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh to Carolina. 4 was Henrique, he's been dealt to Edmonton. 5 was Allen, it sounds like he's going to New Jersey now. 6 was Eberle, he's resigned, so he's not going anywhere. 7 was Toffoli. He's been dealt to Winnipeg earlier today. 8 was just let me double check here. 8 was let me just double check here. 8 was Sean Walker. He was dealt to Colorado. 9 was Capo Caco. He's still on the market. I do wonder if he could potentially be moved. I do think it's a little bit less likely right now, but we'll have to wait and see. And 10 is Anthony Duclair, who was dealt to Tampa late last night. So we do have a lot of players who are in my top 10 wind up being dealt, but we do still have a couple of guys who could wind up being moved. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But we do have a couple more interesting trades that could be happening over the next little while. So interesting stuff there. Let's just double check if there is any more updates from the past little while. Not anything there. We're about 28 minutes away now from the deadline, and like we said, there'll definitely be deals that trickle down afterwards, so definitely going to be some interesting moves. It does sound like Peak will be dealt to Boston. It does sound like Allen will be dealt to New Jersey. Just getting confirmation on those ones. Like we said, Deo Panoa thinks it sounds like the Red Wings are trying to improve their forward group. Let's see what other things that are sort of being talked about right now. Apparently Max Pacioretty is still a guy who could potentially wind up being moved. Pacioretty is a decent third line forward for the Washington Capitals. They're not a stellar team. He was also apparently supposed to go to a team like Florida, but they wound up going a Pozo, so there's no real room there for the Pacioretty right now, cap wise. So it sounds like he could be a guy who ends up going to New York Rangers. So it sounds like it'll be interesting to see where Pacioretty goes. He does have a no movement clause, so he will have to approve a trade. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. It does sound like Wade Allison's still being dealt. I'm not exactly sure how much of exactly how much that is. Actually, here it is. The deal has been finalized. So Wade Allison, who's in the minors right now, has been dealt to the Nashville Predators in exchange for Denis Gurianov. So this is actually a pretty good deal. For the Predators, they've already acquired a couple of decent depth players. They added Bouvillier, they had Zucker, they moved Trennan, but they also had Jared Anderson-Dolan. So they had a couple of young forwards who could help them in their bottom six. So they make this sort of a deal to acquire Allison. Now for the Flyers, Gurianov's a decent bottom six forward, can really help them on their forward group. He so far had 30 points in 27 AHL games and 2 points in 14 NHL games this year with the Predators after having 17 points in 66 NHL games last year. So yeah, I think he could be a really good fit there for the Flyers if they can figure out a role for him. I could see him be like a solid top 9 forward. So we'll have to see exactly how that works out, but that's a really good pickup there for the Philadelphia Flyers. Going over to the Nashville Predators. For them, they get Wade Allison. That's not a bad pickup there. Allison was actually a really good player last year. Didn't make the team out training camp this year. Has been an AHL player ever since. Allison put up 15 points in 60 games last year, 17 points in 46 games this year at the AHL level. So he's done a really good job. He's in the AHL. I wouldn't be overly surprised if the Preds called him up and gave him a chance to really see what he's made of at the NHL level. So that's a pretty good, decent swap. I think Allison, after this year, is an RFA, if I'm correct. Yeah, he's an RFA with Arbright, so I think Gurianov, let me just double check here. I think Gurianov is a UFA, if I'm correct, after this year. Let me just double check. Yeah, Gurianov's going to be a UFA after this year, so this is just a depth forward for the Flyers trying to go for it, add another piece to their lineup. Meanwhile, for the Nashville Predators, they get Wade Allison. Decent pickup there for the Predators, and they are able to get a solid younger forward who's an RFA who they can retain under contract. So it's a really good pickup there for the Predators. And we also now have the Peak contract trade. We also do now have the Peak contract, the Peak deal. So as you probably know, I said this before, Peak has been dealt to Boston. So he's been dealt to Boston with his full cap hit, so a $2.75 million cap hit, in exchange for Jacob Zaboral, who's in the AHL right now, and a 2027 third-round pick. So this is a pretty good move for the Boston Bruins. They don't have really a whole bunch of assets to improve this team, but they have been looking for a defensive upgrade, and this is exactly what happens with Peak. He's got this year plus 2 more seasons at $2.75 million cap hit. this could be a really good move there for the Jackets. I mean, he had a decent season last year, putting up 13 points in 8 games. It was a minus 41. This year's been in and out of the lineup. He's been a healthy scratch on multiple occasions. Has 8 points in 23 games, which isn't overly bad. But it was a minus 2, which means he is doing a little bit better than last year. But he hasn't been able to get consistently into the NHL lineup for the Jackets, so I could see him be a solid third pair defenseman for the Bruins, and I think he could be a really good solid third pair right shot defenseman, shutdown pair defenseman, so that's a really good pickup there for the Bruins. For the Jackets, they get Jacob Zaboral, who hasn't really been working out overly well with the Boston Bruins. He's a left shot defenseman, right shot defenseman, was part of the infamous 3 first-round pick players where DeBrusk, Zaboral, and I think it was Senyshyn were picked right after the other, and they passed on guys like Chabot and Connor. I know that still haunts the Bruins, but still, Zaboral's been a decent player. He's gotten 76 NHL games over the last 4 seasons, putting up 16 NHL points. He's been a decent player. This year's put up 9 assists in 31 AHL games, so he hasn't gone into any NHL action, but he's a decent depth defenseman. And with the Jackets do have a little bit of a crowd blue line, so they could probably use him as a solid depth defenseman. So that's a pretty good move there for the Jackets. Zaboral should be able to be a really decent bottom end the pairing defenseman for the Jackets. I could either see him stay in the AHL or be called up and be a solid 6th, 7th defenseman for the Jackets. So that's a pretty good move there for the Jackets. And they also get a 3rd round pick in 2027. It's not a pick that's anywhere close to being happening, but it's a pick that's going to be way down the line, and I think could be a really good fit there for the Jackets. So really good potential there for the Jackets. But just recap here, 2 quick trades. Allison's been dealt to Nashville Predators by the Flyers in exchange for Denis Gurianov, and Andrew Peeke has been dealt by the to the Boston Bruins by the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for Jacob Zaboral. So that's a pretty good move there for the Jackets too. We're only 23 minutes away from the trade deadline, so I expect there to be a couple more trades over the next little bit. Like we said, we have, I think it was 14 trades over the last little while. Like I said, I think it's about 14 trades we've had over the last little while. Talking about so we are going to talk about some more things. There's very likely going to be some more opportunities there for some more things to happen. Let's see. Let's talk about this. It does sound like there is no news over here. Just looking at some of these things here that could be happening right now. Does sound like there's still not very much news updates here from the past little while. Let's see this. It does sound, according to Elliot Friedman, like Matt Dumba to Tampa is picking up steam. So not a guarantee that will happen, but the Coyotes do really want to move Dumba. They really don't have a whole bunch of time left to do something, so I wouldn't be overly surprised if it was like a 3rd or 4th round pick and maybe a prospect that is moved to Tampa. And given that price tag, I think the Bolts could definitely pull that sort of a deal off. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but this sounds Dumba to Tampa is picking up a little bit of steam. So we'll have to wait and see on that potential trade. So that could be an interesting move there for the that could be an interesting move for the Arizona Coyotes and Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, the Lightning, points percentage-wise, aren't even in a playoff spot right now, so there's no guarantee that this team is going to even make the playoffs. So I don't know exactly if they're going to be going for huge pieces. I mean, they over the past couple of years, if you look at the teams like Tampa, Boston, Florida, Toronto, and specifically, I mean, they've gone for it so much over the past 2-3 years. They don't have any assets to trade at this point in time. So that's why they've only been making smaller moves. Like the Leafs got a couple of depth defensemen. The Panthers have gotten a couple of decent top 6 forwards. The Bruins have gotten guys like Peeke and Maroon. The Bolts have only gotten Duclair. Maybe they pick up Dumba too. So that's probably the reason why we haven't seen so many trades from those 4 Atlantic Division teams, is because they moved off so many of their assets. They have no assets to trade anymore at this point in time. So that's probably why we haven't seen so many trades from those guys. But there's definitely going to be some interesting potentiality there for some more moves to happen. I do wonder. So it's going to be interesting to see. Here are a couple of things that I could see happen over the next little while. So here are a couple of other things I could see that happen over the next little while. It does seem like we are closing in on the trade deadline being finished, so we're going to have to wait and see exactly how that works, but it sounds like there's going to be some things here. So here are a couple of things that I'm wondering about. Here are a couple of pieces that I'm wondering about. Buyers, Boston, do they look to add another center? We've been talking about this for a while now. Their center group is not overly good. Is there a way for them to add another center, even if it's just like a third or fourth line center before the trade deadline? I'm looking at a guy like Nick Bukestad or maybe Scott Laughton, if they can move him. Tampa, like we said, it sounds like Dumbo's going there. That could be their big that could be their big need, so I do wonder about that. Is there potentiality that they'll at least acquire another defenseman, a top 4 right shot defenseman? I think it's possible. It's not a guarantee by any means, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to add a right shot defenseman. Panthers, they added Bjornfot on waivers, Tarasenko and Opozo on the forward group via trade. I'm not sure if they'll really need to do any more moves after these sort of moves that they've already made. If you look at the Metro Division, you have Carolina. They've added on their forward group really well. They have a really solid blue line. Their goaltending looks good. I'm not sure if they'll do any more moves. The Rangers, I do wonder if they try out a top 6 right winger before trade deadline. I do wonder if they could still try and make one of those work. They've added their depth D. They've added the third line center, so I don't see them needing much else besides that. The Flyers have added a veteran right shot defenseman. Elliot Friedman was mentioning a little while ago that they could look to add a veteran goaltender, so I do wonder if there's maybe a veteran goaltender out there who's cheap and not overly expensive, goes to Philadelphia. So we'll have to wait and see on that. On top of that, does Detroit wind up adding? We've been hearing some talks about them potentially moving guys like Gostisbehere and Hull and trying to upgrade their blue line, as well as maybe add another piece or two on the forward group. So could the Red Wings do something before a deadline moves on? Could we see the Tampa Bay Lightning, like we said? Could we see the Flyers do anything else? Could we see the Red Wings? So it'll be interesting to see what those teams do. Do we see the Islanders maybe add? I mean, it's thing. So I do wonder if they try and add. So we'll have to wait and see on that. On top of that, if you look at the Western side and look at the buyers, what they could do. If you look at the LA Kings, I wonder about them adding another goaltender if they can make it work before a deadline. That might be more of a deadline move, in my opinion, but I think it's quite possible that it's quite possible that that's not an extremely likely possibility to happen right now. So I do wonder if they try and maybe add a couple of pieces too if they can. So we'll have to see on the LA Kings. Also on top of that, you have the Edmonton Oilers. Do they try and add something before the trade deadline? They've added Henrique, they've added Carrick, they've added Stetcher. They may be done. We've heard Vegas and Vancouver both be willing to try and add another forward. Could they add top 6, top 9 forward before the deadline? And if so, who could they go after? Could the Avalanche look to try and add on the defensive end even more? Could they add another forward? We've been hearing them being linked to trying to add a backup goaltender. I wonder about Kaapo Kähkönen in San Jose. Could they be looking to add a goaltender before the deadline? We've heard Dallas and Winnipeg be linked to trying to add a depth defenseman. Could those two be interested in trying to add a defenseman? Could we see the Nashville Predators make any more small adjustments to their lineup? So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. We're about 16 minutes away from the NHL trade deadline passing, so we're probably going to have a little bit more trade action over the next handful of minutes. So it sounds like that's probably going to happen. Dumba, like we said, it sounds like he's going to Tampa, so we'll get more confirmation on that in the next little bit. Let's see. Nothing over there right now. Let's see about other things. What about the sellers? Is there any potential other teams who could look to deal sellers? So I'll be interested to see about that. It sounds like sort of like the Stetcher deal from yesterday. It sounds like the Dumba and a 7th round pick is going to Tampa for a 5th round pick. So it sounds like the Coyotes, not exactly sure that's confirmed yet, but it sounds like the Coyotes will only be getting a 5th round pick for Dumba, which I'm quite surprised. I thought Dumba and Chychrun would have been getting like a 2nd or a 3rd round pick, but Coyotes waited too late, and now this is what they're going to be able to get for him. So interesting stuff there. Also, sounds like there's no salary retention on the Dumba deal, so it sounds like that's a possibility too. Let's see other things that could be happening. What about sellers? What sort of moves do you think these sellers could make? Blues, will they move Buchnevich or Parayko? Could they move some of their pending UFAs? What about the Penguins? Do they move Smith? Do they move Pedersen? Do they move Nedeljkovic? What about those guys? Could the Capitals make some moves? Do they move Dow? Do they move Pacioretty? Do they move the other one was Oshie? Could they move any of those guys? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Do the Flyers make any more moves? Could they move Scott Laughton? Could the Islanders move Oliver Wahlstrom? We heard his name being mentioned in the rumor mill. We've also heard about some of the other guys too. I do wonder about those guys, so it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there for the Eastern Conference. I mean, does the Buffalo move Olofsson? Does Ottawa move Kubalik, Brandstrom, Chychrun? Does Montreal move Savard? Does do the Devils move Miller or Smith? Do the Western side, do the Kraken move Shells or Dumoulin? Do the Flames move Markstrom? Could they move one of their forwards? Do the Blues, like we said, do the Wild wind up moving one of their pieces, maybe like a Goligoski or a Merrill? Could the Coyotes wind up moving some more pieces? Bukestad, Kerfoot, Vijmelka? Could the Hawks move Tenorti, Johnson, Blackwell? Could the Sharks move Granlund, Ferraro, Barabanov? So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but it sounds like there's still some moves to happen over the next little while. I'm not exactly sure how quickly that'll happen, but it does sound like there will be some more moves in the next little bit. There's 13 minutes left now before the trade deadline happens, so it sounds like things are going to be coming up soon. Still sounds like Detroit's trying to look for a winger. Still sounds like Dumba's heading to Tampa Bay. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, still nothing there. We'll probably get something. We'll probably be dead for the next like 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then afterwards we'll probably have a flurry of trades be announced at like 12:10, 12:15. And I'll be with you guys until about 12:45, 1 o'clock, discussing all the trades that go down afterwards. So definitely be discussing all of that. And definitely, if you don't stay tuned for the live stream or trade deadline video, don't forget to check it out later today. I'll keep it up so you guys can check it out and look up all of the things that we talked about in this video. So don't forget to stay tuned for that. Definitely seems like there's going to be some interesting things that happen today. And it sounds like there are going to be some more trades that are going to be picking up. We only had 2 signings. I thought there might have been a little bit more signings over the past little while, but we've only had Seattle sign Eberle and Boston signed Weatherspoon, so I'm a little bit surprised we haven't seen more signings. Maybe we'll see some in the coming days, but I am a little bit surprised about that. Trade-wise, like we said, there's been a ton of trades. I think 14, 15 if you include the Dumba deal, so it sounds like we're going to have a couple more trades in the next little bit. It's still waiting exact confirmation on the Jake Allen trade to New Jersey. Still waiting exact confirmation on some of these other deals. There was another trade that happened. It's a depth move, but the Panthers are adding to their goaltending depth. The Panthers are adding Magnus Hellberg from the Florida Panthers, from the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for prospect Ludovic Waber. I'm sure I'm hoping to pronounce that name right, and a conditional 2025 7th round pick. Now, I'm not sure what the conditions are at this point in time. Waber was a goaltending prospect. He's 27 years old, undrafted, probably won't ever amount to anything at the NHL level. At this point in time, he's playing over in the ECHL and the AHL. He's had one bad ECHL game. He's actually been quite decent for the AHL Charlotte Checkers. So he's done pretty well. He has 87 save percentage in 15 games, so not a bad pickup there for the Penguins, but it's definitely not a huge pickup there for trading a guy like Magnus Hellberg. This is a conditional 2025 7th round pick. It's not a huge pickup there either. They trade Hellberg. That's a decent pickup there for the Panthers. They already have Knight and Stolars and Bobrovsky in net, so adding Hellberg gives them 4 really good goaltenders, and if they have an injury to a guy like Bobrovsky or Stolars in the playoffs, they can call up Knight and Hellberg easily. He signed a 1-year deal. He signed a 1-year deal with the Florida Pittsburgh Penguins this offseason to be. He signed, it was a 1-year deal this offseason to sort of be the third stringer in Pittsburgh. He's actually worked out quite well. He's gone to a couple of NHL games of action, putting up a .922 save percentage in 3 games this year after having a .905 save percentage in 19 AHL games. So he looks like a pretty good depth goaltender. I think he could be a fantastic piece there for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that's a really good pickup there for the Penguins. And I think he could be a very fantastic add-on there for the Penguins. So interesting stuff there, but the Penguins do move on from Hellberg. He's a pending UFA. He wasn't going to be brought back, so not too surprised there. And the Panthers do upgrade their goaltending depth, adding Hellberg, and it's not a huge price tag to move either. So, like we said, there might have been some more trades that come in over the next little while. They're 10 minutes away from the NHL's trade deadline. So we're probably going to have a couple more trades that happen and the trickle it on afterwards. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. So it's going to be interesting to see. Interesting stuff there. We do have a couple of other things that are going to be going on. Waiver updates. We've seen Tobias Bjornfoot be claimed off of waivers. We've seen guys like Tobias Bjornfoot be claimed off of waivers by Florida. We saw Boris Kachuk be claimed off of waivers by the Seattle Ottawa Senators. We saw We saw Boris Kachuk be claimed off of waivers by the Ottawa Senators. We saw the Anaheim Ducks be claimed off waivers by claim off of waivers Will Atchison, so that's a pretty good decent pickup there for the Ducks. So lots of interesting moving parts here. We're about 9 minutes away now from the NHL trade deadline, so we're probably going to have a couple more deals over the next little while. Going over to some interesting things that some people are currently saying. Nothing there. It doesn't seem like we really have a whole bunch of info right now. We probably will in the not too distant future. According to David Pagnotta, we have a huge piece of news here that could wind up being significant going forward. The Golden Knights are making progress on acquiring another big player with terms. So I wonder about Buchnevich and Vetrano. Those would be two names that come to mind. There's 10 minutes left to go, so I wonder if the Knights are able to get this over the finish line. I wonder if this could be like an Anthony Mantha deal from a couple of years ago, where at the buzzer, Mantha was dealt to the Washington Capitals in exchange for a first, a second, and I think it was Arana. So I wonder if this is sort of the move that could be happening right now, and I wonder if it's around Buchnevich or Vetrano. I think Buchnevich might be too high of an asking price, so I do wonder if they're sticking around back on Vetrano or something like that. So according to David Pagnotta, it sounds like Vegas is trying to make a huge splash right before a trade deadline. There's now only 8 minutes left before the deadline, so we will have to see if they are able to wind up making that happen. It sounds like the New York Rangers are trying to get Jack Roslovic, the Capitals. Oh, interesting stuff here. According to Frank Saravalli and reiterated by Pierre LeBrun, it sounds like Max Pacioretty is not going to be traded at all anymore. His preferred destination to go was Florida, but it sounds like he'll just finish out the season in Washington, trying to help them compete for the last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So it sounds like the Capitals will probably keep Pacioretty for now, and it sounds like he will not be moved today. So interesting move there by not moving anyone. But we also saw Chris Johnston say recently that the New York Rangers seem to be getting Jack Roslovic from the Jackets, but I said there's a possibility that the Jackets could end up making a move. So that could be a really interesting pickup there for the New York Rangers. I think it could be a very, very great pickup there. On my trade bait list, Roslovic is number, hold on, I'm going to check here. Roslovic is number 32 on my trade bait list. So it looks like number 32 will be off the board with Roslovic going to the New York Rangers. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But it does sound like Roslovic to the Rangers is going to be complete. That's a solid pickup there. It's not the right winger that they wanted, but Roslovic can play center, he can play wing, he's a decent middle six forward. So we'll get more details on that once it's finalized, but that's like Columbus will be getting so my guess will be some sort of a draft pick for a guy like Jack Roslovic. So that's a pretty good pickup there for the New York Rangers. So far we've had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 trades. Then you include the Allen deal, you include the Roslovic deal, you include the Dumba deal. That's around 17 trades, and we still have 6 minutes left to go for teams to make trades. So it sounds like there's going to be some more trades in the next little while. Like we said, handful of signings have happened over the past little while. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of these signings. Which trade do you think has been the best trade for one of these teams? Who do you think has been the best teams coming out of the trade deadline? I mean, we still have a couple more minutes here. There's about 6 minutes left before a trade deadline, so there's still a couple more minutes for teams to make moves. But who do you think won the trade deadline? Is it Vegas? Is it Edmonton, Colorado, Winnipeg, Dallas? Is it the Rangers, the Panthers, the Lightning? Who do you think, after all these moves that have happened so far, wins the trade deadline? Definitely. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, and I'll give you mine as soon as we've got some more trade updates over the next little while. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but definitely some interesting things. And I do think there's a very likely chance that we will get some more moves, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. But I do really think we are going to have a couple more moves that happen over the next little while. So it sounds like Roslovic's to New York's happening. Allen, like we said, to New Jersey. The trade 5 minutes away from the trade deadline, and then GMs have to put their phones down, and that's it. So we will probably get the trickle through effect like we usually do, where there's picks and prospects and things that are moved after the deadline. But even though they're announced after the deadline, they're still done before the deadline. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there. Let's see if there's any more news happening from over the past little while. Nothing right here. See if Elliot Friedman has anything. Let's see. It does seem like the Jackets are going to get Roslovic according to Elliot Friedman. He says that it does sound like it's a 4th-round pick that's going to the Jackets, and a third turns into a third if the Rangers make it to the Cup Finals. So it sounds like it'll be a 4th or 3rd-round pick going back to the Jackets in exchange for the Rangers. So it seems that that deal's probably most likely finalized too. So just the Allen deal, those deals are probably finalized now. We'll just double-check them when they come out officially. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Like we said, we've had a busy day over here so far. 17 trades so far, and it sounds like there's more coming. 4 minutes left before trades have to be done, so it sounds like there's going to be some more trades in the next little while. I would expect most of those trades that happen and trickle in over the next little while are more lower end deals. They're for more AHL level players, depth players, maybe a pick for like a young prospect swap. So I do wonder about those things. Some guys I do wonder about heading into the last couple of minutes of trade deadline. Vetrano and Anaheim, St. Louis with Pavel Buchnevich. It sounds like Dumba is going to Arizona, so that seems like another possibility that's gone. But Parayko in St. Louis, Smith and Pettersson in Pittsburgh. Could we see the Jackets move Ivan Provorov? Could we see the San Jose Sharks move Granlund, Ferraro? Could we see some other guys be moved? So definitely, it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next half an hour, 45 minutes after the trade deadline officially ends. But we're 3 minutes away from the trade deadline officially ending. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for, and we do have a lot of interesting moves from over the past little while. I do think there's a very likely chance that we could see some more trades that happen over the next little while. So stay tuned. We're going to be having some more trades, like we said. I'll just go give you a quick recap of just the basis of all these trades that have happened so far today. Quick recap here. Taking it down to the last wire, Malcolm Subban was dealt by the Blues to the Jackets for future considerations. Washington Capitals moved Evgeny Kuznetsov with half of his contract retained in exchange for a 2025 third-round pick to Carolina. The Panthers acquired Kyle Pozo from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Kalle Sejalin and a 2024 7th-round pick that could upgrade to a 5th-round pick. The Ducks acquired Ben Meyers from the Avalanche for a 2024 5th-round pick. The Penguins moved Chad Ruhwedel to the Rangers for a 2027 4th-round pick. The Rangers and Wild swapped depth forwards, Wild getting Elson and the Rangers getting Patan. Toffoli goes to Winnipeg with the half of his contract retained in exchange for a 2025 2nd and 2024 3rd-round pick. Going to New Jersey, the Detroit Red Wings acquired Ram Shimmick in 2024 7th from the Devils in exchange for Klim Kostin for going to San Jose Sharks. Zucker's headed to Nashville for a 6th-round pick to Arizona. Maroon's headed to Boston for a Toropowski and a 2026 6th-round pick heading to Minnesota. Eric Johnson's going to from Buffalo to Philadelphia in exchange for 2024 4th-rounder. Wade Allison is going to Nashville in exchange for Denis Gurianov. Andrew Peeke is heading to Boston in exchange. The Jackets get Zaboral and a 3rd-round pick, and Magnus Hellberg is going to Florida in exchange. Prospect Weber and a 2025 7th-round pick are going to Pittsburgh. So lots of interesting moves there. We also have a couple of other moves that sound like they're going to be happening in not just the future, including Allen going to New Jersey, including New York Rangers acquiring Jack Roslovic, and including Dumba heading to Tampa Bay. So we've got a couple more moves that are going to be happening next little while. We have 1 minute before our trade deadline, and then we're going to have an interesting way to go before the next little while. So some interesting stuff there. I may have just seen one of the surprisingest trades ever. Vegas is acquiring Thomas Hertl. That is a massive move for the Vegas Golden Knights. It sounds like this is coming out of left field. I did not even know Thomas Hertl was available right now. This is an absolutely surprise to me. It sounds like the Golden Knights are acquiring Thomas Hertl. That is a massive move. I mean, I don't know what's going back. My opinion is this is Chandler Stevenson insurance. I am quite surprised that they made this move. It sounds like there are going to be some more moves that happen in the next little while, but Thomas Hertl's a Vegas Golden Knight. My guess would be this is Stevenson insurance. If Chandler Stevenson leaves in the offseason, which he is a pending UFA, and it's a definitely likely possibility it could happen, my guess would be Thomas Hertl's the replacement for him, but man, that could be a massive move for the Vegas Golden Knights. That could be, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but Vegas looks to be acquiring Tomas Hertl. That's a fantastic move for the Vegas Golden Knights. And after already acquiring Mantha, and on top of that, a defenseman Noah Hanifin, I mean, they are stockpiling up again this offseason, in this trade deadline. Fantastic moves for the Vegas Golden Knights. It does sound like we still have some more trades that are coming. It's 12 o'clock. GMs need to put their phones down. We're now out of the trade deadline, and all the trades that happen after now are going to be for the offseason. So, interesting moves. We have a lot of interesting trades that are going to be happening over the next little while. There are going to be more trades that have happened over the next little while. According to TSN, it says that there have been 18 trades so far. We had 19 in the total of last year. And there's also going to be a couple of, it sounds like, more trades that happen over the next little while that will be trickling in. So we'll have to wait and see and watch some of the rumor updates here from the past next little while. But there's definitely going to be some more trades that happen. So we'll keep an eye on that. But my goodness, I was not expecting Hertl to be able to deadline. I thought it would be like a Calgary Flame or a Washington Capitals pickup in the offseason. I thought there was almost no guarantee that Hertl would go there. And the rivalry, too. I mean, you don't see Vegas and San Jose make too many moves because those two teams hate each other. I know San Jose is a seller. Right now, Vegas is a really good team. But I mean, in the first few years of the Vegas Golden Knights' existence, I mean, Vegas was having first-round series after first-round series with San Jose, and they hated each other. So this is a fantastic pickup for Vegas. Like I said, Vegas acquiring Hertl, in my opinion, is Stevenson insurance. It's just in case Stevenson does not go sign. My guess would be, I still think they want to sign Marchessault. He's a former original Golden Knight misfit. He's a really good piece of that team. But Stevenson, he's probably looking for, my guess would be $5, maybe even $6.5 million on a new extension. They've added Barbashev. They've added now Hertl. I mean, I think they'll be okay with moving on from Stevenson. And now they got Hertl too. I mean, that's a fantastic move there from the Golden Knights. So, I think there's a very likely chance that Hertl would be the sort of Stevenson replacement if they aren't able to get a long-term extension done for him in the offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see, but Hertl is a member of the Vegas Golden Knights. That is an absolutely really good and really interesting move by the Vegas Golden Knights, and that's going to be a whammy of a deal. I don't know exactly what the trade package is as of yet, but it's going to be a huge trade package in my opinion. So we probably got a couple of other trades that are going to be happening over the next little while that are going to come in slowly. So we're going to have to wait and see exactly how those ones go. But we know three trades that are going to be happening that haven't been officially announced yet, and that is that the Rangers are going to get Jack Roslovic from Columbus, the Bolts are going to get Matt Dumba from the Coyotes, and the New Jersey Devils are going to get Jake Allen from the Montreal Canadiens. So those are some interesting pickups there. But my goodness, I was not expecting Hertl. I was expecting Buchnevich or Vetrano. I thought there was a very likely chance the Golden Knights took one more run at a huge forward. It looks like they're going into Hertl. That's a surprise to me. Like I said, I think this is Stevenson insurance personally. I don't know the return. My guess would have to be a first-round pick, probably this year or next year. Now remember, the stipulation of that Hanifin deal was that if they trade the 2025 first-round pick in this year by this year's deadline, then that 2025 first-round pick they moved to Calgary will turn into a 2026 first-round pick. So I could see them move a 2025 first-round pick. My guess would be maybe another pick on top of that. I would be hesitant to say that they would move Brendan Brisson. He's a very fantastic prospect there for the Golden Knights, but I do think it's a possibility. I mean, given how good of a time Hertl is, I mean, given how Hertl signed on like a long-term deal, I think he signed for the next 6 years. I mean, you have Eichel locked up for I think the next 2 or 3 years. You have Carlson locked up for I think it was the next 3 or 4, and you have Hertl if they are to acquire him. I mean, there's still a trade call pending, but if they are to acquire him, that's going to be locked up for like 5-6 years. I mean, you got a stellar center group, and even if they let Stevenson walk as a free agent, you got Hertl, Eichel, Carlson. I don't think any other division team in that division has that good of a center group. You then also have Hanifin. I mean, my goodness, this is a fantastic move by the San Jose Vegas Golden Knights. So we'll have to see exactly what the trade details are. We'll have to see some of the other trades that will happen. We're now 5 minutes beyond the trade deadline, so no teams can now make moves, but we will see some trades fall into place. I do wonder about Vancouver. They could be a team who's interesting. I do wonder about the I wonder about the Bruins. I wonder about some of the other teams. So it'll be interesting to see. But Hertl to Vegas is a stunner in my opinion. I thought they would go after Buchnevich or Vetrano, go after more of a winger. According to David Pagnotta, it sounds like a first-round pick is going back in the deal for Hertl. So that's a massive, massive move there for the Golden Knights. So looking back at some trades, let's see if there's any more updates here from the past couple of minutes. Not at the moment. So some interesting stuff. We also saw some interesting trades happen earlier in the week. We'll just get to a couple of those ones that have happened earlier, a little bit before yesterday and today. So just get to a couple of them here. We saw earlier in February, we saw Monahan be acquired by the Winnipeg Jets, and Elias Lindholm be acquired for a package by the Vancouver Canucks. There wasn't any more trades for another 20 days until Emil Bemstrom was dealt to the Pittsburgh Penguins for a pick and a Nylander going to Columbus, William Nylander's brother Alex. So those were the deals that happened over in February. Then also on February 28th, we saw a Tanev deal. Tanev was dealt to Dallas Stars in exchange for a decent return of Grushnikov, a second and a third. Then we saw Bushkin the next 2 days afterwards. Then we saw Bushkin 2 days afterwards be dealt to the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's a very fantastic pickup there for the Leafs. A very good pickup there. So they were able to acquire him. Then the Anaheim Ducks are able to get a third-round pick in return, so that was a pretty decent deal. McDermott was dealt to the New Jersey Devils. That was a fantastic deal. Then we saw Mansa a couple days ago. He dealt to the Vegas Golden Knights for 2 picks. That was a pretty good deal. Then we had a really good stretch of really good trades over, not yesterday, but 2 days ago. We saw Tarasenko be dealt for 2 picks from Florida to Ottawa to Florida. We saw Johansson and firstly dealt to Philly for a pick and Walker. We saw Byron Milstead swap. That was a really interesting trade. We saw Carrick and Henrique be dealt to Edmonton for a first to Anaheim. So that was a really interesting move. We saw the Kraken move Wenberg to the New York Rangers. And then we saw the big deal with Hannafin. And then we saw all the trades we saw yesterday. I think there were 10 all in total. And now we've so far had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 if you include the Dumba deal, the Allen deal, the Roslovic deal, and the Hertl deal. We're already at 18 trades, and there's probably going to be a couple more that fall in over the next little while. So if you look at the last 3 days, we've had 34 trades over the last 3 days. Like we said, usually right before, I think it was like the last couple of years, we usually had a whole bunch of trades on trade deadline day. But over the past few years, it started happening a lot before. Teams wanted to get their business done way ahead of the trade deadline. So we started to have, like last year was trade deadline week. Deadline day was absolutely dead. There was not really any big moves on deadline day. And they were all mostly small and low end pieces that were being dealt. But this year, we did have a couple of big moves happen right before the deadline, a couple of days prior, but we do still have a couple of big deals that are going to be happening on deadline day. So it definitely seems like there's going to be some more moves that are going to be happening. No real word yet on exactly what could be happening at this point in time. I do wonder about some of these things. Let's see if there's any more updates on any of those deals that we were talking about. According to David Pagnotta, Hertl had to waive his no movement clause to go to Vegas. He has 6 more years left on his contract. He's currently injured, but he will be ready for the playoffs. So that's an interesting move. Yeah, we talked about this a little while ago in one of our videos. Hertl and Couture were both injured with injuries that keep him out week to week. So it's not instant upgrade there for the Golden Knights, but he has to waive his no movement clause. Obviously, Hertl doesn't really want to be on a settling team, and this is going to be fantastic. Hertl's young. He's not the older of the core group in the San Jose, but he is a really good piece, and I think this is going to be a massive addition there for the Golden Knights. I do still wonder what the return is for the Sharks. I mean, it sounds like a first-round pick plus would be my guess. Some more things talked about, according to Pierre LeBrun on TSN, David Savard is staying put. David Savard is not going to move by the Montreal Canadiens, and number 28 on my trade bait list winds up staying put. So interesting move there, but a really good move there for the Canadiens. They're going to keep Savard for this year. Now that's not to say that he won't be moved at all. He'll probably remain for them this year. Now he's going to be entering the final year of his deal in the offseason. So there's a very likely chance he could either be moved in the offseason, or if the Canadiens want to still keep him beyond this offseason, then they could move him at next year's trade deadline if they're still sellers. So that could be a really interesting move there. But some interesting moves there for the Canadiens that don't wind up moving David Savard. So that's a pretty good deal there. That's not a deal for the Canadiens. We do have another deal. It sounds like the Jets and that also hooked up for the second time in the on trade deadline day. According to Darren Dreger, it sounds like the Jets are acquiring Colin Miller from the New Jersey Devils. According to Darren Dreger, not exactly sure what the not exactly sure what the return is for him, but that could be a decent pickup there for the Winnipeg Jets. So that's a pretty good pickup there for Winnipeg. We've also got, it sounds like the Hurdle deal is going to be happening in the not too distant future. It's a massive move for the Golden Knights. So interesting stuff there, but definitely some interesting moves that are going to be happening over the next little while. So it sounds like Miller to Winnipeg from the New Jersey Devils. That's going to be a really interesting move. We know that there's a couple other guys who could definitely be moved that are probably going to get moved, but it sounds like it's not official yet. So we're going to have to wait and see. Let me just double check here. Yeah, still no updates here as of yet, but there will definitely be some more trades that are going to trickle in over the next little while. So definitely, lots of interesting stuff. I mean, which team do you think has upgraded the most in the East, and which team do you think has upgraded the most in the West? I mean, in the East, you've got Boston. At this point in time, not exactly sure what else they might do, have done at this point in time, but they have added Peak, and they've added Maroon to that team. So are they a better team? The Panthers have added Hellebuck. They've added Bjornfot off of waivers. They've also added Tarasenko and Oposo up front. Are they a better team? The Toronto Maple Leafs have Edmondson and Liabushkin on the blue line. Are they a better team? The Tampa Bay Lightning have had Dumbo on the blue line, and it sounds like, and also Duclair on the forward group. Are they a better team? The Rangers have added Wenberg on the forward group, and Roslovic on the forward group, and Ruedel on the defensive end. Are they a better team? The Carolina Hurricanes have added Gensel and Kuznetsov on the forward group. Are they a better team? Definitely. Which one of those five teams do you think has upgraded the most? Philly's moved Walker. They've acquired Ryan Johansson's contract, re-signed Sealer, added Eric Johnson. Are they a better team at this point in time? Definitely love to hear your thoughts on that. On top of that, what do you think about the West? Are Vegas a better team by adding Hurdle, Mantha, and Hanifin? Is Vancouver a better team by adding Lindholm and Zadorov? Is Edmonton better by adding Stetcher, Henrique, and Carrick? Is LA a better team? They haven't done anything yet. Is Nashville a better team by adding Bouvillier, by adding Zucker, by adding a Jared Anderson-Dolan? Is the Jets better by adding Monahan and Toffoli? Are the Stars better by adding Tanev? Are the Avalanche better by adding Middlestad, Trennan, Duhaime, Walker? Which teams do you think have improved the most over this trade deadline period, and which teams do you think are more well positioned at this point in time to become a lot better going forward into the playoffs? Definitely, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that. So, love to hear your guys' thoughts on those things. On top of that, what other moves could we see happen over the next little while? It sounds like there are some moves coming, but definitely a lot of things have to be finalized. So not any updates on confirmations here yet, but it does sound like there are some moves that are going to be coming. Let's see if there's any updates here from some of the insiders. Let's see. Interesting. According to Elliot Friedman, there are two pieces here. Hurdle's been retained 17%. Now, this is interesting here because the Sharks have two retention spots already taken up in Burns and Carlson. So according to Elliot Friedman, they've already eaten up 17% of Hurdle's contract. So that really leaves them without being able to retain any contract salary for the next couple of years. So that's a horrible blow for the Sharks to have to do that, but to move Hurdle's contract off that team for a team who's trying to move off cap space and get younger, it's something they had to do. So interesting move there. David Edstrom apparently is the key piece going from San Jose, and it sounds like there is a first in 2025, so it sounds like it's probably going to be first in 2025, Edstrom, and maybe a couple of other pieces for the Golden Knights to move him. Edstrom was the first-round pick, the last first-round pick of last year's draft, so it sounds like that's probably the thing, and they're able to get Soundsy to retain 17% off of Hurdle. So Rivals wind up connecting on a huge blockbuster deal right before the deadline. So that's an interesting move. Interesting, according to Frank Saravalli, there was a trade that was supposed to happen but didn't happen, and this was something I was actually wondering about. It sounds like the Bruins and Kings were talking about a Linus Ullmark deal but weren't able to get across the finish line. So it sounds like Ullmark was a potentiality to go to Boston. I have talked about this before. I was saying how the Kings have a really good center group of Deneau, Dubois, and Kopitar, and Byfield can play center too. They have a really good center group. And the Bruins have a really good goaltending tandem, including Ullmark and Swayman. But the Kings don't have a really good goaltending group, and the Bruins don't have the best of center depth. So I was always thinking, as early as last year after they acquired Dubois, would there be a possibility that the Kings move one of their centers, whether it be a Deneau or Dubois, to a team like the Boston Bruins in exchange for one of their goaltenders, whether it be Ullmark or Swayman? Now, Swayman's played fantastic. I wasn't expecting that after this year that Swayman would be dealt. With Ullmark's name being out there, I thought there would have been a potentiality of a deal like, say, Ullmark going to LA for Deneau or something like that. So saying that Ullmark did have some talks about going to the Kings, like the Bruins had talks about Ullmark going to the Kings by Frank Seravalli, is interesting, and I think that's something that could be revisited into the offseason. I think the Bruins will still be looking for a center upgrade. I think the Kings will be still looking for some goaltending help in the summer, and I think there's a very likely chance that that sort of deal could get revisited in the offseason. So interesting stuff there, but it does sound like Ullmark was a potential candidate to go to LA, so interesting stuff there. Hurdle apparently is expected to return in the regular season, so the cap has to be working for the regular season, so that's an interesting move there. So I do wonder if there's someone off the roster that's going off there. I wonder about Alec Martinez. I know he's been a really good piece there, but with Hannafin being now there, I'm not sure if they really need Martinez, so I do wonder if the Martinez maybe is like a cap dump. I do wonder about that, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Pierre Lebrun is saying that so here's what this seems like is the thing. So the Hurl blockbuster is sort of like this. According to Darren Dreger, the return is this: a first in 2025, a third in 2025, a third in 2027, prospect David Edstrom, who was the 32nd overall pick back in last year's draft, and Hurdle, who has 17% of his contract retained at $6.75 million. So that's what it seems like is the return for San Jose, and they're retaining 17% of his contract. So that's a really interesting move there. I was not expecting Hurdle at all. I was expecting the Golden Knights to go after Buchnevich or Vetrano. They go after Hurdle. I mean, that center depth is lethal. I mean, besides LA, Vegas probably has now the best center depth in the Western Conference. I mean, if you look at Winnipeg, they have some pretty good center depth. Colorado has some pretty good center depth. The Stars have some pretty good center depth. The Canucks, after acquiring Lindholm, have some pretty good center depth. So the Oilers. So, I mean, all those teams in the Western Conference are built off of really strong centers. So that's a really good move there for the Golden Knights if that is what happens. So some interesting moves there. I do wonder how many more trades we'll get. We're already 17 minutes past the deadline. Has there been any sort of confirmation on any of these moves yet? Let's see. It does look like we do have one of them. Nope. Still nothing at this point in time. So we are still waiting confirmation on all of these moves. So it's some interesting moves there too. I mean, that's a massive deal. I was expecting like maybe a first and a second plus a prospect for like a Vetrano or something, or maybe they'd be bold enough to go for 2 firsts for Buchnevich, but they pivot and they go after Hurdle. I'm shocked. I mean, this is fantastic for Golden Knights, but I was not expecting that in the least. Hurdle was definitely not on my trade bait board. He was not going to be on my trade bait board for the offseason. I thought he was more of an off-season move, but that's a fantastic move for the Golden Knights, and that is a fantastic addition there. And also the Sharks, we must forget, this is a pretty good addition there. A first round pick in next year's draft, a young prospect who looks fantastic in David Edstrom, a couple of other depth picks, and on top of that, they also clear Hurdle's cap off their salary, which is something they've been trying to do. I mean, they've cleared Carlson's contract off his salary, they've cleared Burns' contract off, they've now cleared Hurdle's contract off. They still have retention. I mean, if I look at the retention slots right now for the San Jose Sharks, hold on for a second. Let me just pull this up here. Let's see exactly what the retention slots look like here for the San Jose Sharks going forward. So the San Jose Sharks currently are retaining $2.72 million on Burns and at $1.5 million on Carlson. Now they're retaining Burns for the rest of this year plus one more season. So they'll have Burns for the rest of this year plus one more season, so that's an interesting move there. And then they also have 1.5 being retained on Carlson for this year plus 3 more seasons. So they do have those 2 retained salary slots. Now they're going to retain Hurdle, who is let's see, got this year plus I think they said either 5 or 6 more seasons. So they're retaining on Hurdle for 5 or 6 more seasons. They're retaining on Carlson for 3 more seasons, and they're retaining on Burns for next year. So as much as there's an interest there, I do think they could have moved some other guys. I do wonder what this means for a Logan Couture deal. Does he remain in San Jose? Because I was expecting Couture to be a guy who gets half his salary retained, gets moved at the deadline, winds up gets moved in the offseason and winds up being a solid veteran line center for like a team like Calgary or Washington or Boston at like a $4 million cap hit. But with their retention slots, they can't retain any salary as early as the 2025 offseason. So interesting move there for the Sharks. I do wonder what this means for Couture. It does free up some cap space, so that's really good news for the Sharks, but still, so really interesting and, in my opinion, quite surprising blockbuster deal between the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights. So some interesting stuff there. We also got a couple of other things to talk about here. It sounds like there's some more trades that are trickling in. We'll look at some other things that some of the insiders are saying right now. According to the Minnesota Wild, it sounds like Connor Dewar is going to the Maple Leafs. So that's a really interesting pickup there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Dewar is a really fantastic bomb six forward. He should be able to bring up some physicality and some really good depth on that Toronto Maple Leafs team. So that's a very fantastic pickup there for the Maple Leafs, if that is true and he does go to Toronto. Like we said, interesting stuff that Allmark was being talked about going to LA. According to Frank Cervelli, a couple other things I didn't realize. He says the Oilers are done, that they finished the deadline shopping, so the Oilers have completed their moves, and they're basically going to be done with just Henry, Carrick, and Stetcher. So there's not too many moves, but there are some pretty decent moves there for the Oilers. I do think that makes them a little bit better. Carrick improves that fourth line for sure. He's a lot better of a fourth line center than a guy like Derek Ryan. They also got Henrique, who can play third line center minutes, or he can play on the wing. He can be a very versatile player, and is a proven playoff performer too, so getting him back into the playoffs will be fantastic. On top of that, you got Stetcher, who's a decent depth defenseman, but he's going to be a fantastic player for that team. So some great moves there for the Edmonton Oilers over the trade deadline, but it's not huge moves. They do move their first round pick for this year, but it's definitely some interesting moves there. Let's see. According to Elliot Friedman, like we said, Dewar is going to Toronto, so it sounds like that's going to be one that's going to be happening in the not too distant future. Wonder what the return is there for Minnesota, who's moved a couple of pieces now off their roster. Let's see. Yeah, so it sounds like Toronto is going to be moving Dewar to Minnesota, acquiring Dewar from Minnesota, so that's a pretty decent addition there for the Wild. For the Leafs, the Wild are able to move another piece. I mean, they've gotten a couple of decent picks. I mean, they've already gotten a third-round pick for Duhaime, a sixth and a prospect for Maroon. So I do wonder what they what the pickup here is on Dewar. So they've been just moving some of their pending free agents who are not huge pieces of their future, not huge, really surprising there for the Minnesota Wild. Let's see if there's any other updates here from the last little while. Yeah, nothing seems to be there. So it's interesting. Going to be a really interesting stuff there for them. So some interesting stuff for these teams. Let's just take a quick look at our trade bait list. Let's see the top 20 and see who has been moved and who has not. So Pavel Buchnevich, number 1 on my trade bait list, still has not been moved. Very fantastic, top 6 winger. I don't think he did get moved by the trade deadline, so he'll probably remain as a number 1 trade deadline player. And there's a potentiality there he could extend in St. Louis in the offseason, so he'll probably will be one of my trade bait lists, one of my players on my trade bait list in the offseason going forward. Hannafin's dealt to Vegas, Gensel to Carolina, Henrique to Edmonton, Allen to New Jersey, Eberle signed in Seattle, he's staying there. Toffoli's dealt to Winnipeg, Walker's dealt to Colorado. Kakko, I think he probably stayed. Doesn't sound like the Rangers made too many huge moves, so he's probably going to remain there. Now he's going to be a restricted free agent in the offseason. I do wonder about him being a potentiality of possibly being moved in the offseason, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Duclair's been dealt to Tampa, so does Dumba. Variant for Toronto probably stayed, I think, at this point in time. It doesn't seem like he will be moved. So that's a pretty good stay there for the Ducks. They can keep him for one more season, and they can possibly trade him next year or in the offseason. Markstrom sounds like he stayed. Not exactly sure if he winds up being moved or not in the offseason, but he'll definitely be a guy who's on the trade bait list in the offseason. Barabanov's a pending UFA. He could be a very fantastic late acquisition right about the 12th minute mark, so I do wonder about Barabanov still being moved. Barry, I do wonder still being moved. Chychrun, he's going to be named to watch out for in the offseason. They probably didn't get moved. I wouldn't say it's a guarantee, but I think it's probably likely that he didn't get moved, and he's probably going to remain in the trade rumor mill for the next little while until he sends a contract extension or until he's moved. So we'll have to wait to see that situation in the offseason. So some interesting stuff there, but still interesting moves there to see Hurdle go to Vegas. It sounds like according to Darren Dreger, he wants to be clear here, it's actually 2/3 going to Vegas as well. So it's a first and Edstrom to San Jose in exchange for 2/3 and Hurdle and 70% of his contract retained. So that seems interesting. It's a really big out of left park trade by the Vegas Golden Knights and San Jose Sharks. You don't usually see rivals like that hooking up on a deal, so it's a really interesting trade, and it's a very fantastic deal. So lots of interesting stuff there. And lastly here, going over to the some more other things. According to Pierre LeBrun, he just said that Hurdle is expected, just like Elliot Freeman said, back before the playoffs, so they have to be cap compliant before then. So it's interesting stuff there. Some other things. It sounds like Connor DeWar is going to the Leafs. According to Dennis Bernstein, the LA Kings did not consider selling off parts, including Matt Roy, and Kempe and Anderson are very close to coming back. Arvidsson's on track to return when he's eligible to come off of LTIR, so that's really good news there for the Kings. But they did nothing. The Kings stood pat this year's trade deadline, so I'm a little bit surprised by that. I thought they might have gone one thing. It's not like they were in on Allmark, and they did want to try and improve that team, but they weren't able to get the assets to move something like that. So that seems like they're going to be more of an off-season move. And out of the 6 teams that really do seem to be in the playoff race, I mean, if you want to count Nashville, you can, but even Nashville, I mean, Nashville added Bouvillier, they added Jared Anderson-Dolan, they added Zucker. They made some really solid additions on their forward group. Knights made great additions. Oilers made some pretty good additions. Canucks made some pretty good additions, even though they did most of their business right before the deadline, way before the Avalanche made some good additions, Stars made some good additions, Jets made some good additions. All those teams got a lot better. Kings stayed pat, and they're just going to run with the players that they're going to get back off of injury reserve. So they weren't able to get too much to do, but I did think there was a possibility they could wind up getting a goaltender or something like that. It does sound like they were close, but the Kings are going to stand pat for the trade deadline. So interesting moves there. We do have the Allen trade specifically locked down. So Allen, half of his contract retained, 50%, so a $1.925 million cap hit of Allen is going to the New Jersey Devils. In exchange, the Montreal Canadiens get a conditional 2025 third-round pick. The condition is if it upgrades to a 2025 second-round pick, if Jake Allen plays in 40 or more games in 2024-2025, and if the club that Allen is a member of qualifies for playoffs in 2024-2025. So if Allen is a member of the Devils next year or with another team and he qualifies for his playoffs, that upgrades to a 2025 second-round pick, and also if he plays 40 games. So there's a couple of trade stipulations there, but the Canadiens do got a really good pick here in exchange for Jake Allen. It's not the first that a lot of people were expecting the Canadiens to get for Allen, but at least it is a good pickup there for them. And for Allen, he's going to make that Devils goaltending a lot better. I mean, they've had goaltending struggles all season long. Allen should be able to provide a little bit more of a stabilizing force. I mean, Vanecek's been shaky a little bit this year. Dawes has come in and looked pretty good, but he's not the real starter at this point in time. Schmid, he's looked fantastic at some points in the AHL, but he's mostly been not so good at NHL level. So they have 3 goaltenders there who all didn't really work out overly well this year, and they are able to get Allen. So Allen, I think, would probably be a tandem goaltender with most likely Vanecek. I think they may move Dawes back down, or they may try and run with a 3-headed goalie system again, maybe running with like Vanecek being a third stringer. So I do wonder what they do there, because Dawes has actually played quite well. So I do wonder if they try and go with the Allen-Dawes tandem, or if they try and have Vanecek be like a back up and move Dawes down. I do wonder how that works out, but Allen has played in 21 games this year, so he's been the third stringer in his own situation in Montreal with Primo and Montembeault getting the starts. He's put up a 3.65 GA and an 892 save percentage, so slightly worse GA than last year in 42 games and a slightly better save percentage. So not a huge improvement so far this year, but he has been playing inconsistently. So hopefully if he's able to get a stretch of games and that Devils defense is able to get a little bit healthier, this Devils team is able to make some moves here. So that's a pretty good move there for the Devils. It's not a huge upgrade, and it's not the starting level goalie upgrade that everyone was expecting them to make, but this is a fantastic move for the Devils that they're able to get Allen at 50% of his contract retained too. So if you look at the Montreal Canadiens though, that